My son sent a text that shattered my world in 3 seconds. Plans changed. You are not coming. My wife wants only her family. He thought I would sit at home and cry. Instead, I canceled the payment, sold the house right out from under them, and left town. By the time they returned from their little vacation, the locks were changed and their luxury life was gone. But before I tell you how I destroyed their entitled little world, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who took your kindness for weakness. I am Earl Jackson, 68 years old, and I have spent my entire life building things. Bridges, highways, foundations that hold up skyscrapers. I know that if a foundation is rotten, you do not paint over it. You tear it down. My son Terrence and his wife Courtney never understood that. They thought my silence was weakness. They thought my generosity was an endless river. They were wrong. It was a Tuesday morning, the kind of crisp autumn day that makes you feel glad to be alive. I was in my bedroom, the master suite that I had built with my own hands 30 years ago, carefully packing my old leather suitcase. This bag was special. It was the same worn brown leather valise I had taken on my honeymoon with my late wife Martha. The leather was cracked in places, and the handle was worn smooth by the grip of my hand over decades of work and travel, but it still smelled like cedar and memories. I smoothed out my best linen suit, the cream-colored one Martha always said made me look like a movie star, and laid it gently into the case. I was humming an old Sam Cooke song, feeling a lightness in my chest I had not felt in years. I was about to embark on a 7-day luxury cruise to the Caribbean. It was supposed to be a celebration. My son Terrence and his wife Courtney were celebrating their 5th anniversary. I had paid for everything. $15,000. That money covered the VIP suites, the unlimited drink packages, the shore excursions, and the first-class flights to Miami. I had even paid for Courtney's parents to come along. I wanted it to be a big, happy family event. I looked at the mirror and adjusted my tie. I told myself that this trip would fix things. It would bridge the gap that had been growing between me and my son. Maybe under the Caribbean sun, Terrence would stop looking at the floor when I spoke to him. Maybe Courtney would stop making those little comments about how my clothes were outdated or how I chewed too loudly. I was willing to overlook the small slights because family is everything. That is what Martha always told me. Keep the peace, Earl. Keep the family together. Then my phone buzzed on the dresser. It was a single vibration, short and sharp. I picked it up, expecting a message from the airline or maybe Terrence asking if I was ready for the airport pickup. The screen lit up with a text from Terrence. Dad, plans changed. You are not joining the cruise. Courtney thinks it is best if we keep this trip intimate. My wife wants just family. We will make it up to you later. I read the message once, then I read it again. I put on my reading glasses and read it a 3rd time, tracing the words with my thumb. My wife wants just family. The words hung in the air like smoke. Just family. I was the father who raised him. I was the man who paid for his college tuition. I was the man who wrote the check for the down payment on the car he was driving. I was the man who just spent $15,000 so they could sip cocktails on a boat. And yet, I was not family. But Brenda Courtney's mother, who had never contributed a dime and had called me a grump to my face last Thanksgiving, she was on the guest list. She was family. I did not throw the phone. I did not scream. A younger Earl Jackson might have punched a hole in the drywall. But the Earl Jackson standing there today felt a coldness spread through his veins, starting at his fingertips and settling deep in his chest. It was the coldness of clarity. I sat down on the edge of the bed right next to the open suitcase. I looked at the linen suit I had just packed. Suddenly I felt foolish. I was an old man playing dress-up, trying to buy the love of people who saw me as nothing more than an ATM machine. I thought about the last 3 years. I let them move into my house when Terrence lost his job. I let them take over the living room. I let Courtney redecorate the kitchen, painting over the yellow walls Martha loved with a cold, sterile gray. I stayed quiet when they forgot my birthday last year. I stayed quiet when Courtney told her friends at a dinner party that they were allowing me to live with them as if this house did not have my name on the deed. I sat there for 10 minutes listening to the silence of the empty house. The clock on the wall ticked loudly. Tick-tock, tick-tock. With every second, the hurt faded and something else took its place. Resolve. I picked up the phone. I did not reply to Terrence. I did not give him the satisfaction of an argument. Instead, I scrolled through my contacts until I found the number for Bob. Bob was an old army buddy of mine who now ran a travel agency. He was the one who booked the trip. Bob answered on the second ring. "Earl, my man, are you ready for the high seas?" I took a deep breath. "Bob, there has been a change of plans. I need you to access the booking. Right now." There was a pause. "Is everything okay, Earl? You sound serious." "I need to make some adjustments, Bob. Listen to me carefully. I am not going on the trip." "Oh no, Earl. That is a shame. Do you want to cancel? You might lose the deposit, but I can try to get some of the money back." "No," I said, my voice steady and low. "Do not cancel. If I cancel, the money goes back to the card or they get a flight credit. I do not want that. I want to transfer the primary name on the VIP suite." "Transfer it to whom?" "To you, Bob." There was a silence on the other end. "Excuse me. You heard me. You and your wife. Pack your bags. You are going to the Caribbean. I already paid for the suite. It is non-refundable, but it is transferable. I would rather you enjoy it than have it go to waste." "Earl, I cannot accept that. That is a $5,000 room. You can and you will. Consider it a thank you for 40 years of friendship." "But Bob, there is one more thing." I paused, walking over to the window. I looked out at the front yard at the rose bushes I had planted for Martha. "The other cabins," I said. "The ones for Terrence Courtney and her parents. Yeah, I see them here. The all-inclusive platinum package. Unlimited dining, premium beverages, spa access. It is fully paid. Downgrade them." "Downgrade them?" Bob asked, confused. "Yes. Change their status from all-inclusive to pay-as-you-go. Remove the drink packages. Remove the prepaid gratuities. Remove the dining credits. Keep their rooms because I want them to get on that boat. I want them to sail away. But I want the credit card on file removed." Earl, Bob's voice dropped to a whisper. "If I do that, they will get on the ship thinking everything is free. But once they are in international waters—" "Exactly," I interrupted. "Once they are out at sea, every bottle of water, every glass of wine, every steak dinner, they will have to swipe their own cards. And Bob, yes, Earl, make sure the notification for this change does not go out until the ship leaves the dock. Can you do that?" I could hear the smile in Bob's voice. He knew me. He knew I didn't do things like this without a reason. "Technically, the system updates at midnight. If I make the change now, they won't get the alert until they are already waving goodbye to Miami. Do it." I hung up the phone. I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. It wasn't joy. It was the feeling of a foreman correcting a structural error. I stood up and walked over to the suitcase. I took out the linen suit and hung it back in the closet. I wouldn't be needing it. I wasn't going to the Caribbean. I had a lot of work to do right here. I walked downstairs to the kitchen to make a pot of coffee. As the water boiled, I looked around the room. The granite countertops I had installed, the custom cabinets. This was my home, my sanctuary. And they wanted to push me out of it. That was when I heard the sound of a car engine outside. I froze. They were supposed to be at the airport by now. Why would they be back? I moved silently to the living room window and peered through the blinds. It wasn't Terrence's car. It was Courtney's SUV. And Terrence wasn't in it. The driver's door opened and Courtney stepped out. She looked impatient, checking her watch. Then the passenger door opened. It was Brenda, Courtney's mother. I watched as Brenda stepped onto my driveway, looking up at my house with a greedy smile on her face. She pointed at the master bedroom window. My bedroom window, and said something to Courtney. Courtney laughed and nodded, handing her mother a set of keys. My keys. A realization hit me so hard it almost knocked the wind out of me. The text message wasn't just about the cruise, it was a distraction. They didn't just want me off the boat, they wanted me out of the house. They thought I would be gone. They thought I would be so heartbroken or confused that I would just disappear, or maybe they thought I had already left for the airport before getting the text. I watched as Courtney popped the trunk. It was filled with boxes, suitcases, Brenda's things. My son told me I wasn't family, and now his wife was moving her mother into my home while they went on vacation using my money. They were planning to swap us out, put the old man in a home, put the mother in the master suite. I stepped back from the window. My hand hovered over the light switch. I could go out there right now. I could scream. I could demand my keys back. I could call the police, but that would be too easy. That would be a temporary victory. They would just wait for the next time I was vulnerable. Number one, I needed a permanent solution. I turned off the lights in the living room, plunging the house into darkness. I sat down in my favorite armchair in the corner, invisible in the shadows. I watched as they walked up the path to my front door. I heard the key turn in the lock. Let them come in, I thought. Let them think they have won. Tomorrow everything changes. Tomorrow I visit my lawyer. Tomorrow I visit the bank. And tomorrow I sell this house. When they unlocked the door and stepped into the foyer, giggling like schoolgirls who had just gotten away with a prank, they had no idea that they were walking into the lion's den. They didn't know that Earl Jackson was done building bridges. It was time to start using the demolition hammer. I drove my old Ford pickup truck down the street where I used to live. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned the color of ash. I did not pull into the driveway. I knew better than that. Instead, I parked 3 houses down behind a large oak tree where the shadows were long and deep. I turned off the engine and rolled down the window just an inch. The air smelled of rain and freshly cut grass, but all I could taste was bile. From my vantage point, I could see everything. The house I built with my own 2 hands stood there like a monument to my stupidity. And there they were, the invaders. A large white moving van was backed up right to the front door. 2 men in blue coveralls were hauling furniture inside, but they were not bringing in new sofas or tables. They were carrying boxes marked with floral patterns and hat boxes that I recognized immediately. Those belonged to Brenda. Then I saw something that made my heart stop. The 2 movers came out of the front door carrying my recliner. That was not just a chair. That was the leather recliner Martha bought me for my 60th birthday. It was the chair I sat in every night after work to nurse my aching back. It was the chair I sat in for 3 weeks straight after Martha passed away because I could not bear to sleep in our empty bed. The leather was worn in the shape of my body. It was my sanctuary. I watched as Courtney stood on the porch pointing a manicured finger toward the garage. She was directing them to throw my chair into the cold, damp garage like it was a bag of garbage. Brenda stood next to her laughing and fanning herself as if the mere sight of my belongings offended her delicate sensibilities. I needed to hear them. I needed to know for sure. I opened my car door quietly and slipped out. I kept to the hedges, moving with the stealth of a man who had spent his youth hunting in these woods. I crept up to the side of the house near the open living room window. The voices drifted out clear as a bell. Brenda was speaking. Her voice was shrill and grating. "This living room is going to look so much better once we get rid of that awful dark wood furniture Earl loves so much. It is so depressing. When are you going to tell him he cannot come back here?" Courtney laughed. It was a cold sound. "Oh, Mother, do not worry about Earl. Terrence and I have it all figured out. We are going to let him enjoy his little cruise or whatever he is doing. When he gets back, we are going to have a family meeting. We have already spoken to Dr. Stevens. We are going to claim Earl is showing signs of early dementia. He forgets things. He gets angry easily. It will be easy to get power of attorney." I crouched lower beneath the window, feeling the blood pound in my ears. Dementia. They were going to gaslight me. They were going to tell the world I was crazy so they could lock me away in some facility and take everything. Brenda clucked her tongue. "Well, he does seem a bit confused lately. A nursing home is really the best place for him. He will be safer there, and I will be much more comfortable in the master suite. This house is far too big for one old man anyway. It is a waste of resources." A waste of resources. That is what I was to them. I was not a father, or a grandfather, or a provider. I was an obstacle. I was a resource to be mined until dry and then discarded. I had heard enough. I did not need to scream. I did not need to burst in there and cause a scene. That is what a crazy man would do. That is what a man with dementia would do. And I was neither. I was a man with a plan. I crept back to my truck and drove away. I did not look back. I had a destination, and it was not the cruise ship terminal. It was the heart of the city. 30 minutes later, I was sitting in the office of Alana Hart. Alana was a shark in a silk blouse. She had been my lawyer for 15 years ever since the accident. She looked at me over the rim of her glasses, her eyes sharp and assessing. "Earl, you are supposed to be on a boat drinking a piña colada. Why are you in my office looking like you want to kill someone?" I sat down and placed my hands flat on her mahogany desk. "I am not going on the boat, Alana. And I need you to pull the file on the house." She frowned but tapped a few keys on her computer. "Which file, Earl?" "The deed." "Yes, the deed. And the lease agreement Terrence signed 3 years ago." Alana pulled up the documents. "I remember this. You wanted to protect the asset. You bought that house outright. I nodded. I leaned back, closing my eyes for a second, remembering exactly where that money came from. People thought I was rich because of the construction business. They did not know the truth. That money was blood money. It came from the settlement I got after a steel beam crushed my leg and fractured 3 vertebrae. That money was paid for with my pain. It was paid for with the limp I still walked with on rainy days. It was paid for with the career I had to give up. I bought that house so my son would never have to struggle like I did. I thought I was building a legacy. Alana was reading the screen. Okay, here it is. The deed is in your name only. Earl Jackson. No mortgage, no liens. And here is the lease agreement. You had Terrence sign a standard rental contract for $1 a month. It was a formality to establish residency. Does it have the termination clause I asked for? I asked, my voice steady. Alana scrolled down. Yes. Clause 4B. The landlord reserves the right to terminate the lease immediately and without notice if the tenant engages in illegal activity or if the property is sold. It also states that failure to pay utilities for 3 consecutive months constitutes a breach of contract. I opened my eyes. Terrence has not paid the water or electric bill in 6 months. I have been paying them to keep the lights on for my granddaughter, but she is not even real, is she? It was all a lie. Alana looked at me with sympathy, but she knew better than to offer pity. What do you want to do, Earl? I want to sell it. Today. Alana stopped typing. Today. Earl, a standard sale takes 30 days minimum. You need inspections. You need appraisals. I do not have 30 days. I have 7 days before that ship comes back. I want it gone. I want the locks changed. I want the furniture out. I want it to be like I never existed. Call the investors. Alana hesitated. You mean the cash buyers, the ones who buy ugly houses. Earl, they will lowball you. They will offer you 20% less than market value. You will lose almost $100,000. I looked Alana dead in the eye. I do not care about the money. I care about the speed. And I care about the eviction. I want a buyer who is ruthless. I want a buyer who does not care about a sob story from a young couple. I want a shark. Alana nodded slowly. She picked up her phone. I know a guy. His name is Mr. Vance. He runs a property acquisition firm. He buys distressed properties and flips them. He is not a nice man, but he closes in 24 hours. Call him. An hour later, Mr. Vance walked in. He was a small man with eyes like beads of black glass. He wore a suit that cost more than my first car. He did not shake my hand. He just looked at the photos of the house Alana had printed out. Nice area, he said, his voice dry as dust. But the market is cooling. And you want a cash close in 24 hours with occupants still inside. That is messy. Evictions are a headache. I leaned forward. The occupants have no legal standing. Their lease is void, and here is the deal, Mr. Vance. I will sell it to you for $400,000. The market value is $550,000. That is $150,000 of instant equity for you. All you have to do is sign the check and take possession tomorrow morning. Vance's eyes flickered. He did the math instantly. He knew a steal when he saw one, and the stuff inside he asked. Furniture, electronics, personal items. I felt a pang in my chest, but I crushed it. Everything left inside as of tomorrow morning conveys with the property. Trash it, sell it, keep it. I do not care. I just want the keys out of my hand. Vance pulled a contract out of his briefcase. He did not even need to call his office. He wrote the terms on the spot. Cash sale, as is, where is, immediate possession. I picked up the pen. My hand did not shake. I thought about the text message. My wife wants just family. I thought about Courtney laughing about putting me in a nursing home. I thought about my leather chair rotting in the damp garage. This was not just a house sale. This was an amputation. I was cutting off a limb to save the body. I signed my name. Earl Jackson. The ink looked black and final. Vance took the paper and handed me a cashier's check. Pleasure doing business with you, Mr. Jackson. My crew will be there at 8 a.m. sharp. We bring our own security. We do not like interference. That is exactly what I am counting on, I said. I stood up. I felt lighter. I was homeless, technically. I had sold the roof over my head for less than it was worth. I had destroyed my son's inheritance. But for the first time in 3 years, I felt free. I shook Alana's hand. Thank you, Alana. One more thing. Yes, Earl. When the sale is recorded tomorrow, send a notification to the address, but send it via certified mail. They won't be there to sign for it, so it will sit at the post office until they get back. By then it will be too late. Alana smiled a sharp, dangerous smile. You are a scary man, Earl. I put on my hat. I am just a man who knows the value of a strong foundation, Alana, and I just bulldozed a rotten one. I walked out of the office and into the bright afternoon sun. I had money in my pocket and a tank full of gas. I was not going to the Caribbean, but I was going on a trip. I was going to find the man I used to be before I let them turn me into a doormat. But first I had one more stop to make. I had to go back to the house one last time before the sharks arrived. I had to get the only things that really mattered. I was not there to see it happen, but I know my son, and I know his wife. I can picture the scene at the port of Miami as clearly as if I were watching it on a movie screen. The Florida sun would be beating down on the white pavement, baking the air with the smell of salt and diesel fuel and expensive perfume. It is a place of chaos and excitement where thousands of people rush to escape their lives for a week of manufactured paradise. My son Terrence would be wearing those linen trousers he bought specifically for this trip, the ones that cost more than my first car. He would be sweating, not just from the heat, but from the pressure of maintaining the illusion he had built. And Courtney. Oh, I can see Courtney. She would be standing there with her phone held high in the air, documenting every second for her 3,000 followers. She would be smiling, that practice smile, tilting her head just so to catch the light, making sure everyone online knew she was living the high life. Hey guys, we have finally arrived. VIP boarding. About to board the ship for our anniversary week. So blessed. She would not mention that the VIP tickets were paid for by her father-in-law. She would not mention that the man who made this possible was currently at home packing up his entire life. To her, I was just the silent financier, the invisible wallet that opened whenever she snapped her fingers. And then there was Brenda, Courtney's mother. She would be complaining. She always complained. The line was too long, the sun was too hot, the porter was too rough with her luggage. I bet she said something like, I do not know why we have to wait with the common people. Earl said he got us priority boarding. And Courtney probably laughed that cold little laugh of hers and said, Do not worry, Mom, once we are on board, it is champagne and caviar. Besides, it is better this way. Without Earl here dragging us down, we can actually have fun. He always kills the vibe with his old war stories and his penny pinching. This week is about us. Just family. Just family. That phrase again. It echoed in my mind as I sat on the floor of my empty living room 3 states away. They thought they were walking into paradise. They had no idea they were walking into a financial buzzsaw. They reached the check-in counter. I can imagine the agent. A nice woman, maybe named Sarah, with a tired smile and a crisp uniform. Terrence would step up first, sliding our passports across the counter with the confidence of a man who thinks everything has been taken care of. Checking in for the Jackson party. We have the Platinum All-Inclusive Suite. The agent would type on her keyboard. Click, clack, click. Then she would stop. Her smile would falter. She would squint at the screen and type again, harder this time. Is there a problem? Terrence would ask, tapping his fingers on the countertop. Sir, I am showing a reservation for Terrence Jackson and guests. But there seems to be a flag on the account. A flag? What kind of flag? Courtney would step in, then lowering her sunglasses. Excuse me, we are VIPs. My father-in-law paid for this months ago. There must be a mistake with your system. The agent would look up, her face professional but firm. The reservation was modified yesterday, madam. The primary card holder, Mr. Earl Jackson, removed the payment method for the onboard expenses and the remaining balance for the suite upgrade. What? Terrence's voice would crack. That is impossible. He paid for everything. The system shows a refund was processed to the original card and the billing was transferred to the passengers. To board today, you will need to settle the outstanding balance for the suite upgrade and provide a card for the daily gratuities and incidentals. Courtney would turn to Terrence, her eyes wide with shock that was quickly turning into rage. Terrence, what is she talking about? You said he took care of it. I did. He did. Terrence would pull out his phone, dialing my number frantically. I sat there in my house watching my phone buzz on the floor. Terrence calling. I let it ring. Once, twice, 3 times. Then it went to voicemail. He is not answering. Terrence would hiss, staring at the screen. The agent would clear her throat. Sir, we have a long line behind you. If you want to board, I need a payment of $15,240. $15,000. Brenda would gasp, clutching her pearls. Oh my God, we cannot pay that. Terrence, do something, Courtney would hiss in his ear. Fix this, Terrence, right now. I have already posted that we are boarding. Do not humiliate me. I can see the sweat rolling down Terrence's back. He was trapped. He could not turn back. They had driven to Miami. Their luggage was already on the conveyor belt. His wife and mother-in-law were staring at him like he was a bug under a microscope, and the people in line behind them were starting to grumble. Here, Terrence would pull out his wallet. His hands shaking, he would pull out the credit card I gave him for emergencies. Use this one. The agent would swipe it. Beep. I am sorry, sir. This card has been declined. Declined. But that is my dad's card. It has a $50,000 limit. It says, card inactive, reported lost or stolen by the owner. The blood would drain from Terrence's face. He knew then. He had to know. This was not a mistake. This was a message. Try this one. He would pull out his own Visa card, the one he was maxed out on because he bought Courtney a diamond bracelet for her birthday. Beep. Declined. Insufficient funds. Courtney would be turning red now. Terrence. People are staring. I have another one. I have my Amex. He would fumble for the card he used for work expenses, the one he was not supposed to use for personal things. The agent swiped it. Silence. Then a receipt printed. Approved for $5,000. But you still owe $10,000, sir. Terrence would look at Courtney. Honey, do you have your card? Courtney would look at him like he had just asked her to scrub a toilet. Are you kidding me, Terrence? My money is for the remodel. Please, Court. I will pay you back. As soon as I get a hold of Dad, I will fix this. He must have just made a mistake with the bank. Please. We cannot go home. Think of the Instagram story. That would be the kicker. The image. The vanity. Courtney could not walk away. She pulled out her card, the one she kept secret from him, the one with her savings. Fine. But you are paying me back with interest, Terrence. They swiped her card. It went through. They were approved to board. But the damage was done. They were not walking onto that ship as kings and queens anymore. They were walking on as debtors. They had just drained their emergency funds, their savings, and their dignity in the span of 10 minutes. Back in my empty living room, my phone pinged. A notification from the bank app on my personal phone. Transaction alert. Joint account ending in 4455. Attempted charge $15,000. Status declined. Card frozen. I smiled. A slow, cold smile. It worked. They were on the ship. They had paid the entrance fee with their own blood, and now they were trapped in the middle of the ocean with no lifeline. I stood up and walked over to my laptop, which was sitting on a packing crate. The house was almost empty now. The echo of my footsteps was the only sound in the room. I opened the laptop and logged into my email. I had one more message to send. I opened the draft folder. I had written this email 3 days ago, just waiting for the right moment. The subject line was simple. Notice of lease termination. I typed in Terrence's email address. I knew he never checked his main inbox while on vacation. He always said an auto-reply that said, out of office living my best life. So I knew this email would sit there buried under newsletters and spam for 7 whole days. He would not see it until he came back. Until he was standing in front of a house he could no longer enter. I read the words one last time. Dear tenant, this letter serves as formal notice that your lease agreement for the property at 42 Oak Street is hereby terminated effective immediately due to breach of contract clause 4B regarding failure to maintain utility payments. The property has been sold to a new owner who will take possession on Monday. Any personal items remaining on the premises have been considered abandoned and removed. I hovered my mouse over the send button. I thought about the time Terrence was 5 years old and he fell off his bike. I picked him up, wiped his tears, and bought him ice cream. I thought about the time he graduated college and I cried in the stands because I was so proud. Then I thought about the text. My wife wants just family. I clicked send. The email swooshed away into the digital void. It was done. The bridge was not just burned, it was blown up. I closed the laptop and put it in my bag. I looked around the living room one last time. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the floor where my son used to play. Enjoy your vacation, son, I said to the empty room, because when you get back, the real storm begins. I walked out the front door and locked it. I dropped the key into the mailbox. I would not need it anymore. The new owner, Mr. Vance, had his own keys, and he had his own bulldozers. I got into my truck and started the engine. The radio was playing an old blues song. I turned it up. I drove away from the house, driving toward the highway. I did not know exactly where I was going, but I knew I was driving toward freedom. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like the captain of my own ship. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away, Terrence was probably walking into his cabin, realizing it was smaller than the brochure promised and wondering why the bottle of champagne on the table had a price tag of $200 hanging from its neck. Welcome to the real world, son. Admission is not free. The morning sun that filtered through the blinds of my living room did not feel like a new beginning. It felt like the lights coming on in an operating room. Bright, clinical, unforgiving. I stood in the center of the floor holding a box of heavy-duty black contractor bags. These were not the flimsy white kitchen bags you use for orange peels and coffee grounds. These were thick industrial plastic meant for construction debris, meant for things that are heavy and broken and sharp. I had hired a crew to help with the furniture, but there were things I had to do myself. There were ghosts in this house that only I could exorcise. I started with the mantel above the fireplace. This was the altar of the Jackson family. For years, it had been crowded with trophies and framed photos. I reached for the picture of Martha. It was taken on our 25th anniversary. She was laughing, her head thrown back, her dark skin glowing in the candlelight. I wiped a speck of dust from the glass with my thumb. This went into the brown leather suitcase. It was coming with me. Next to it was my Purple Heart. The metal was cool to the touch. I remembered the jungle in Vietnam. I remembered the pain. I remembered coming home to a country that did not always love me back, but I built a life anyway. That metal went into the suitcase too. Then I picked up the wedding photo of Terrence and Courtney. They looked so happy. Or maybe they just looked expensive. I looked at my son's smile. It was the same smile he had when I taught him to ride a bike. But looking at it now, I saw something else. I saw the weakness in his jaw. I saw the way his eyes were not looking at the camera, but looking at his reflection in the lens. I did not feel anger. Anger is hot. This was cold. It was the feeling of a judge delivering a sentence. I did not put the photo in the suitcase. I did not put it in a box for storage. I dropped it into the black plastic bag. The glass cracked as it hit the floor. It was a satisfying sound. I moved through the house like a reaper. The collection of jazz records I had spent 40 years curating went into the keep pile. Coltrane, Miles Davis, Thelonious Monk. These were my friends. They had comforted me when the house was empty. But then I came to the entertainment center. Terrence's video game console. He was 32 years old and he still spent 4 hours a day playing games while I paid the electric bill. Into the bag. His collection of limited edition sneakers that he displayed on shelves like art. Into the bag. The participation trophies he insisted on keeping from his high school track team. Into the bag. Every item I dropped into that black abyss severed a tie. It was a physical amputation. My heart hurt. I will not lie to you and say it was easy. Every father wants to leave a legacy. Every father wants to pass the torch. But I realized that if I passed the torch to Terrence, he would just use it to burn down everything I built. By noon, the living room was stripped bare. The walls looked bigger. The echoes were louder. Then the truck from the shelter arrived. I had called the St. Jude's Charity Center. They helped families who had lost everything in fires or floods. They were good people. The driver was a big man named Marcus. He looked at the mountain of boxes in the driveway. "You are giving all this away, Mr. Jackson?" Marcus asked, wiping sweat from his forehead. "This is high-end stuff." I looked at the stack of Courtney's things. I had cleared out the master closet. It was obscene. There were rows of red-bottomed shoes, Christian Louboutins, $600 a pair. There were Gucci handbags that cost more than my first truck. There were silk scarves and designer dresses with the tags still on them. Courtney liked to shop when she was sad. She liked to shop when she was happy. She liked to shop just to show she could. And every single swipe of the card was paid for by the sweat of my brow. "Take it all, Marcus," I said. Marcus picked up a pair of the heels. "These are barely worn. Are you sure the lady of the house won't mind?" I looked Marcus in the eye. "The lady of the house is gone. The previous owner is dead." I meant it metaphorically, but as I said the words, I felt their truth. The Earl who was a doormat was dead. The Courtney who ruled this house was erased. While Marcus and his team loaded the truck, I went back into the master bedroom for one last check. The room was empty now, except for the built-in shelves. I walked over to the painting of the lighthouse that hung near the bathroom. I took it down. Behind it was a small wall safe. Courtney and Terrence thought they were so clever. They had changed the code when they moved into the master suite. They thought I did not know. But I built this house. I installed this safe. I knew the master override key was hidden behind the false bottom of the battery compartment. I opened the safe. It was mostly empty. They had taken their jewelry and passports for the cruise, but in the back was a leather-bound notebook. I recognized it. It was Courtney's planner. She carried it everywhere. She called it her vision board. I opened it. I expected to find grocery lists or appointment reminders. What I found made my blood turn to ice. It was a financial timeline. Page 1 was dated 6 months ago. It was titled Project Freedom. Entry 1. Move Mom in by October. Earl is getting slower. We can claim he is forgetting to turn off the stove. Entry 2. Dr. Stevens says a diagnosis of early onset dementia is possible if we provide consistent anecdotal evidence. We need to start documenting his outbursts. Entry 3. Sell the house by January. Estimated value $550,000. Put Earl in Shady Pines State Facility. Use the equity to buy the condo in Miami. I read the words again. Shady Pines. I knew that place. It was a warehouse for the forgotten. It was a place where old people went to die in urine-soaked sheets. This was their plan. This was what my generosity had bought me. A ticket to a state facility while they drank cocktails in a condo bought with my life's work. Any tiny shred of guilt I had felt about selling the house evaporated. It was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I dropped the notebook into my pocket. I would keep this. This was my insurance. This was my shield against the lies they would tell when they came back. I walked out of the bedroom and down the stairs. The house was completely empty now. The charity truck was pulling away. The rooms echoed with silence. I looked at my watch. It was 4 in the afternoon. A black pickup truck pulled into the driveway. It was followed by a flatbed truck carrying a small excavator and a crew of men carrying sledgehammers and crowbars. Mr. Vance stepped out of the truck. He was wearing a hard hat and holding a clipboard. "Mr. Jackson," he said, "you are right on time. I walked out to meet him. The keys are on the kitchen counter. The house is yours." Vance nodded. He signaled to his foreman. The crew started unloading the equipment. They did not move with the care of movers. They moved with the aggression of demolition men. One of the men walked up to the rose bushes in the front yard. Martha's roses. They were blooming red and vibrant. The man revved up a chainsaw. For a second I wanted to scream. I wanted to run over and stop him. Those were her flowers. But then I remembered Courtney's plan. I remembered Shady Pines. If I left those roses, Courtney would just tear them up to put in a hot tub. She would trample them. It was better this way. "Do it," I whispered. The chainsaw roared. The roses fell. It was ugly. It was violent, but it was clean. Vance handed me the final cashier's check. "You sure you do not want to stick around to watch?" he asked. "No," I said. "I have seen enough." I walked to my truck. I did not look back at the house. I did not look back at the window where I used to watch my son play in the yard. I started the engine. As I pulled away, I heard the first swing of the sledgehammer. Boom! It hit the front porch. The sound was like a gunshot. Boom! It hit the beautiful oak door. Boom! It was the sound of a heart stopping. It was the sound of a foundation breaking. I drove down the street. The sound of the destruction faded behind me, but I could still feel the vibration in my bones. I was homeless. I was alone. I was 68 years old. But as I merged onto the highway and saw the open road stretching out before me, I realized something. I was alive, and for the first time in years, I was driving my own car. Let them come back to the rubble. Let them come back to the dust. I was already gone, and I had the map to a new life in my pocket. The rearview mirror showed nothing but the road behind me. I turned my eyes to the horizon. This was not the end. This was just the demolition phase. Now it was time to rebuild. I was sitting on the porch of a rented cabin 3 states away, listening to the crickets and watching the fireflies dance in the tall grass. It was peaceful. It was the kind of peace money cannot buy. But while I sat there enjoying the silence, I knew that hundreds of miles away in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, my son and his wife were walking into a hurricane. I could picture the scene perfectly because I know Terrence. I know how he reacts when his ego is bruised. After the disaster at the port where they had to drain their savings just to get on the ship, they would have gone straight to their room to regroup. Courtney would have cried. Brenda would have complained about the size of the cabin. But then Terrence would have stood up and puffed out his chest. He would have told them not to worry. He would have said that they were still Jacksons and Jacksons travel in style. He would have promised them the best dinner on the ship to make up for the rough start. So they went to the steakhouse. I know they did because I received a notification on my phone at 8:30 in the evening. It was from the credit monitoring service I still had linked to Terrence's social security number. I set it up years ago when he had his identity stolen in college, and I never turned it off. They seated themselves at a table by the window, looking out at the dark ocean. They wanted to prove to everyone, including themselves, that they belonged there. They ordered the Wagyu beef, they ordered the lobster tail, and they ordered wine. Not the house wine. They ordered a bottle of Chateau Margaux. It cost $300. Courtney would have been snapping pictures the entire time. She would filter out the red puffiness of her eyes from crying earlier. She would angle the camera so the label of the wine bottle was visible. She posted a picture with the caption, "Living our best life. Nothing can stop us." They ate like kings. They laughed too loud. They treated the waiters with that casual disdain that people who have never worked a service job in their lives often display. Brenda sent her soup back because it was lukewarm. Courtney complained that the lighting was not flattering. Terrence sat there drinking glass after glass of wine, trying to drown the voice in his head that told him he was in trouble. Then the bill came. It was over $600. Terrence did not flinch. He reached into his wallet. He had already maxed out his personal cards at the port, but he still had one card left. It was a business credit card linked to a small LLC he had set up for consulting work. He thought it was safe. He thought it was separate from me. What he forgot was that 5 years ago when he started that business, he had no credit. I was the one who co-signed for the business line of credit. I was the guarantor. My assets secured his spending power. He handed the card to the waiter with a flourish. "Keep the change," he probably said. The waiter walked away. Terrence leaned back, smiling at his wife, thinking he had saved the night. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The waiter did not come back with a receipt. Instead, a man in a white uniform with gold epaulets walked toward their table. He was the maitre d', but he was not smiling. Behind him stood 2 large men in security uniforms. The dining room went quiet. You know how it is on a ship. Sound carries. People stopped eating. Forks hovered halfway to mouths. Mr. Jackson, the maitre d', said loudly enough for the surrounding tables to hear. "We have a problem with your payment." Terrence laughed nervously. "That is impossible. Run it again. It is a business card." "We did run it, sir. It has been declined. The issuer reports that the credit line has been revoked." "Revoked?" Terrence stood up, knocking his napkin onto the floor. "That is a mistake." "It is no mistake, sir. And because this card has been flagged for potential fraud regarding the collateral backing it, we are required to freeze all on-board charging privileges for your party until this is resolved." Courtney gasped. "Fraud? Are you accusing us of stealing?" The security guard stepped forward. "Ma'am, please lower your voice. Mr. Jackson, we need you to come with us to the purser's office immediately." They had to do the walk of shame. The entire restaurant watched as they were escorted out. The people they had been trying to impress were now whispering behind their hands. I can imagine Courtney trying to shield her face from the onlookers, but there is nowhere to hide on a ship. They were taken to a small windowless office on the lower deck. It smelled of ozone and industrial cleaner. The chief purser sat behind a metal desk. He looked at Terrence with zero sympathy. "Mr. Jackson, we contacted the issuing bank. They informed us that the guarantor of the line of credit, Mr. Earl Jackson, personally called this afternoon and withdrew his collateral. Since the business has no assets of its own, the bank immediately closed the account to prevent further liability." Terrence looked at the man stunned. "My father did that." "Yes. And since you have already consumed a dinner worth $600 and you have no valid method of payment on file, we are locking you out of your cabin." "Locking us out!" Brenda shrieked. "My heart medication is in there." "We will allow you to retrieve essential medication," the purser said calmly. "But you will not be accessing the room for leisure. Unless you can provide a valid payment method right now for the dinner and a deposit of $2,000 for incidentals, your key cards are deactivated." Terrence pulled out his phone. His hands were shaking so bad he almost dropped it. He called the bank. He put it on speaker because he wanted to prove the ship was wrong. I was not there, but I know exactly what the bank representative told him because I instructed them on exactly what to say. The voice on the phone was crisp and professional. "Mr. Jackson, your father provided the deed to his home and his investment portfolio as security for your business credit line. Today he presented a bill of sale for the home and liquidated the portfolio. He has formally removed himself as your guarantor. Without his assets backing you, your credit score does not qualify for this card. The account is closed. The silence in that room must have been deafening. Terrence hung up the phone. He looked at Courtney. Courtney did not look at him with love. She looked at him with pure, unadulterated hatred. "So you are saying," she whispered, her voice trembling with rage, "you are saying we have no money. We are stuck on a boat in the middle of the ocean and we have $0. Terrence stammered, "I can fix this. I will call him again. He will not answer." Courtney screamed. She grabbed her purse and dumped it on the desk. She pulled out a crumpled $20 bill. "This is all the cash I have." Brenda opened her purse and found $50. Terrence checked his pockets. He had nothing. The purser sighed. He had seen this before. He looked at the three of them, pitiful and broke in their expensive clothes. "I will tell you what I will do," he said. "I will unlock your cabin, but I am deactivating your charging privileges entirely. You cannot buy a drink. You cannot eat in the specialty restaurants. You can eat at the free buffet on the Lido deck and drink tap water. The cost of tonight's dinner will be added to your final bill, which you will have to settle before you are allowed to disembark. If you do not pay, you will be handed over to the authorities at the port. Do you understand?" They nodded like scolded children. They walked back to their cabin, but it was not the suite they thought they were getting. Because they had to pay at the last minute at the port, they had been assigned whatever was left. It was an interior cabin on the lowest deck. No window, no balcony. Just 4 bunk beds bolted to the wall in a room the size of a walk-in closet. They squeezed inside. The air was stale. The walls seemed to close in on them. That is when the real explosion happened. Brenda sat on the bottom bunk and kicked off her shoes. She looked at Terrence, who was standing in the corner trying to make himself small. "You are useless," Brenda spat. The venom in her voice was thick enough to choke on. "I told Courtney not to marry you. I told her you were a weak man. But I thought at least you had access to the family money. I thought at least you were smart enough to keep the old man happy." Terrence looked at his wife for support. "Courtney, say something. Tell her it is not my fault. Dad is crazy. He is doing this to spite us." Courtney turned to face him. Her mascara was running down her cheeks, making her look like a deranged clown. "It is your fault, Terrence," she said. Her voice was low and dangerous. "You told me you handled him. You told me the house was practically ours. You told me he was signing the papers. You lied." "I did not lie," Terrence pleaded. "He was supposed to sign. I do not know what happened." "You are a child," Courtney yelled, slapping the wall. "You are a 32-year-old child living off his daddy's allowance. And now, because you could not keep your father under control, I am going to be the laughingstock of the internet. I posted that wine, Terrence. I posted it. And now I have to go eat sloppy joes at the buffet with the commoners while my followers think I am living like royalty." She sat down on the bed and buried her face in her hands. "I hate you," she sobbed. "I hate you, and I hate your miserable father," Brenda chimed in. "He is right, you know. Earl is doing this on purpose. He is evil. But you, Terrence, you are worse. You are pathetic. You let him humiliate us. If you were a real man, you would have taken power of attorney years ago. You would have secured the assets. But no, you wanted to play nice." Terrence sank to the floor. He pulled his knees up to his chest. The room was spinning. For the first time in his life, there was no safety net. There was no daddy to call to fix the flat tire. There was no check coming in the mail. He realized then that he was trapped in a steel box in the middle of the Atlantic with 2 women who loved his wallet more than they loved him. And the wallet was empty. Back on my porch, I finished my beer. I looked up at the stars. I did not feel happy about what was happening. It is a tragedy to watch your own blood suffer. But a bone has to break before it can set properly. I went inside and turned off the light. I slept like a baby that night. But on the ship, I doubt anyone closed their eyes. The nightmare had just begun. And they had 5 more days of tap water and recriminations to go. I was not there to welcome them home, but I can tell you exactly how it happened. I know the rhythm of a disaster, and I know the smell of desperation. The cruise ship docked in Miami at 7 in the morning. Usually this is the time when travelers are sad that their vacation is over, but for my son Terrence and his entourage, disembarking was the first breath of freedom they had taken in 5 days. They walked down the gangway, not with the strut of VIPs, but with the shuffle of refugees. They were tired. They were hungry because they had refused to eat the dry toast at the breakfast buffet out of stubborn pride. They were wearing the same clothes they had worn the night before because they had run out of clean laundry and refused to pay the ship's exorbitant laundry fees. They dragged their own suitcases. There were no porters rushing to help them because porters expect tips, and my family did not have 2 nickels to rub together. The Florida heat hit them the moment they stepped out of the terminal. It was a humid, sticky heat that makes your clothes cling to your skin like a second layer of regret. They walked to the parking garage. Terrence was probably trying to keep his spirits up, telling Courtney that once they got to the car, everything would be fine. He had a secret stash of cash in the glove compartment of his SUV. Just $50, but enough for gas and a drive-through meal. They reached level 4 of the parking deck, spot G4. It was empty. Terrence must have blinked and looked again. He probably walked around the concrete pillar thinking he had forgotten where he parked. But then he saw it. A yellow sticker on the concrete wall. Vehicle towed due to repossession order by lender. I had called the bank the day they left. I told them exactly where the car was parked. I told them that the primary borrower had defaulted and surrendered the vehicle. They wasted no time. Courtney screamed. It was a sharp sound that echoed off the concrete walls. "Where is the car, Terrence? Where is my car?" Terrence stood there staring at the empty spot. He realized then that the arm of Earl Jackson was long enough to reach them even when I was absent. They had no car, they had no cash, they had mountains of luggage. And they had Brenda, who was fanning herself and complaining that she felt faint. They had to use a rideshare app. But since Terrence's credit cards were dead, Courtney had to link her debit card. She saw the price for a luxury black SUV and she nearly cried. $70. She did not have $70. They had to order a shared ride, the cheapest option. 10 minutes later, a dented Toyota Corolla pulled up. The driver was a kid who looked barely old enough to shave. He popped the trunk, which was already half full with another passenger's groceries. They had to squeeze their designer suitcases onto their laps in the back seat. Brenda sat in the middle, squished between Terrence and Courtney. The air conditioning in the car was broken. The windows were rolled down, blowing hot exhaust fumes into their faces. The drive took 45 minutes. 45 minutes of silence. 45 minutes of Brenda whimpering. 45 minutes of Courtney staring out the window, plotting her revenge. She was probably composing the speech she would give me when she walked through the door. She was going to demand I pay for the car. She was going to demand I apologize. She was going to threaten to never let me see my grandchildren. She still thought she had leverage. She still thought she had a home. The car turned onto Oak Street. Terrence sat up straighter. He just wanted to get inside. He wanted to turn on the central air conditioning. He wanted to lie down on his Italian leather sofa. He wanted to raid the wine cellar. "That is the house right there," Terrence told the driver, pointing a shaking finger. "Just pull into the driveway." The driver slowed down. He squinted through the dirty windshield. "Which house?" the driver asked. "You mean the construction site?" Terrence looked, and then his heart stopped. The house was there, but it was not the house they left. The beautiful manicured lawn, the one I paid a landscaping crew $500 a month to maintain, was gone. It was a field of churned brown mud. Tire tracks from heavy machinery had turned the green grass into a wasteland. The rose bushes, Martha's roses, they were gone, uprooted, erased. But that was not the worst part. The windows were gone. Every single window on the first floor had been removed. The holes were covered with sheets of rough plywood spray painted with orange numbers. The front door, the solid oak double door with the brass knocker that Courtney loved to polish. It was missing. In its place was a sheet of heavy clear plastic stapled to the frame, flapping in the wind like a lung gasping for air. A large yellow sign was staked into the mud where the mailbox used to be. "Danger. Demolition zone. Keep out. Property of Vance Development." The driver stopped the car at the curb. "I cannot pull in there," he said. "It is blocked off." Courtney opened the door before the car even stopped moving. She stumbled out onto the sidewalk, her high heels sinking into the soft mud. "No," she screamed. Her voice was guttural. It was the sound of an animal that returns to its den and finds it buried. "No, no, no." She ran toward the house. She did not care about the mud ruining her shoes. She ran up the walkway, tripping over chunks of broken concrete. She reached the porch. She ripped at the plastic sheet covering the door. "Get out!" she screamed into the empty house. "Get out of my house!" A man in a yellow security vest stepped out from the shadows of the foyer. He was big. He wore a utility belt and sunglasses. He did not look like a man who cared about Instagram influencers. "Ma'am, you need to step back," the guard said, his voice flat. "This is a restricted area. This is my house," Courtney shrieked, grabbing the plastic. "I live here. My husband lives here. Where is my furniture? Where is my life? The guard blocked her path. He did not touch her, but his presence was a wall. Nobody lives here, ma'am. This property was acquired by Vance Development 3 days ago. The interior has been gutted for renovation. You are trespassing. Terrence ran up behind her. He was pale. He looked like a ghost. Sir, my name is Terrence Jackson. My father owns this house. Earl Jackson. The guard consulted a clipboard. Earl Jackson was the previous owner. He sold the property. The transaction is closed. We have full possession. Now I am going to ask you to move your vehicle and your people off the premises before I call the police. Courtney looked at Terrence. She looked at the plywood windows. She looked at the mud. The reality finally hit her. It was not a bad dream. It was not a prank. The house was gone. And then came the thud. Behind them on the sidewalk, Brenda collapsed. She did not just faint gracefully like they do in the movies. She crumpled. She let out a moan and slid down onto the hood of the Uber driver's car before sliding onto the pavement. Mom Courtney screamed, turning around. Brenda lay there fluttering her eyelids. It was a performance I had seen a dozen times. Whenever Brenda was cornered, whenever she lost control, she played the victim. My heart, she gasped, clutching her chest. Terrence, you killed me. You and your father killed me. The Uber driver was out of the car now, yelling, Hey, get off my car. You people need to get your bags out. I have another ride. It was a circus. A tragic, muddy, humiliating circus. Terrence was trying to fan his mother-in-law with a piece of cardboard he found on the ground. Courtney was screaming at the security guard. The Uber driver was throwing their suitcases onto the sidewalk. And I sat hundreds of miles away, feeling the vibration of justice in the air. Get your bags, the driver yelled, slamming his trunk. Good luck with the house. He sped away, leaving them standing on the curb in a cloud of exhaust. They stood there, surrounded by their luggage. 4 people who thought they were royalty, now standing on a public sidewalk with nowhere to go. Terrence looked around. He looked at the neighbors' houses. People were watching. Mrs. Higgins from across the street was peering through her curtains. The neighbors they had snubbed, the people they had called boring, were now witnessing their downfall. We need to get inside, Courtney whispered. Her fight was gone. She was just scared now. Terrence, tell him we need to get our things. My clothes, my jewelry. The guard shook his head. The interior was cleared out yesterday, ma'am. Anything that was left behind was deemed abandoned property according to the sale contract. Abandoned. Courtney's eyes went wide. Yes. The clean-out crew put everything on the curb for pickup. The guard pointed a gloved finger toward the far side of the driveway near the large municipal trash cans. There was a pile. It was a mountain of black plastic bags. There were at least 30 of them piled high like a monument to waste. It had rained the night before, a heavy summer downpour. The bags were sitting in a puddle of muddy water. Some of them had ripped open. Courtney ran to the pile. She did not run with grace this time. She scrambled. She tore open the nearest bag. It was filled with clothes, her clothes. But they were not folded. They were mashed together. A silk blouse was wrapped around a dirty sneaker. A cashmere sweater was soaking wet from the rain that had leaked through the tear in the bag. My dresses. She whimpered, pulling out a ball of wet fabric. Terrence was digging too, but he was not looking for clothes. He was frantic. My charger, he muttered. I need a charger. My phone is dead. I need to call a lawyer. He ripped open a bag. It was full of his video games. The console was cracked. The cords were tangled in a wet knot. He dug deeper. He found his collection of awards from his sales job. The cheap plastic trophies were broken. He found a phone charger, but the end was crushed, stepped on by a heavy work boot. They looked like scavengers. They looked like raccoons digging through the trash for scraps. Brenda sat up on the sidewalk. She realized no ambulance was coming. She realized the performance was over. She crawled over to the pile, dragging her expensive handbag through the dirt. My pills, she croaked. Where is my medicine box? Terrence found it. It was in a bag with the kitchen junk. The box was wet, but the pills were dry inside. He handed it to her. She took it without a thank you. She looked at the house. The plywood windows stared back like dead eyes. What are we going to do? Courtney asked. She was holding a single wet shoe. Just one. The other was missing. Terrence looked at his wife. He looked at the wreckage of his life. He looked at the house that had sheltered him for free for 3 years. I do not know, he whispered. The sun began to set, casting long shadows over the mud. The mosquitoes started to come out. Terrence looked at his phone. The screen was black. Battery dead. He looked at Courtney's phone. 10% battery remaining. Call a motel, he said. With what money? Courtney hissed. Terrence put his head in his hands. He sat down on a wet trash bag. He finally understood. This was not just about a house. This was about survival. And for the first time in his life, he was completely unarmed. Above them on the sign, the word danger seemed to glow in the twilight. But the real danger wasn't the construction site. The real danger was the night that was falling and the cold, hard truth that they were on their own. I wonder if in that moment, amidst the trash and the mud, Terrence thought about the text he sent me. My wife wants just family. Well, he had his wish. It was just family now. Just the three of them sitting on a pile of garbage while the world moved on without them. 2,000 miles away from the humidity and the mud of Florida, the air tasted like pine needles and cold, clean water. I was sitting in a folding canvas chair on the edge of Flathead Lake in Montana. The sun was beginning to dip behind the mountains, turning the sky into a bruise of purple and gold. It was quiet. Not the heavy silence of an empty house, but the living, breathing silence of nature. The only sounds were the gentle lap of water against the rocky shore and the sizzle of a rainbow trout cooking over a small fire I had built. I took a long sip of my beer. It was cold and bitter and perfect. For the first time in 3 years, my shoulders did not feel heavy. For the first time in 3 years, I was not worrying about whether the air conditioning bill would be paid or if Courtney would complain about the volume of my television. I was just Earl Jackson, a man with a fishing rod and a full tank of gas. I watched the smoke rise from the fire, curling up toward the first stars of the evening. I flipped the trout with my pocket knife. The skin was crispy and golden. It was a simple meal. A meal for a man who knows what he needs and what he does not. Then the silence was broken. My cell phone was sitting on top of the cooler. It started to vibrate, rattling against the plastic lid. The screen lit up with a photo I had taken years ago. It was a picture of Terrence at his college graduation, smiling and hopeful. I looked at the phone. I knew who it was. I knew exactly what was happening at that moment in Florida. They were standing on the sidewalk surrounded by garbage, realizing that the castle had turned into dust. I let it ring. 1 ring, 2 rings, 3 rings. I took another sip of beer. I considered not answering. I considered throwing the phone into the lake right then and there. But I knew I needed to have this conversation. I needed to close the loop. This was not about cruelty. This was about clarity. I reached out and tapped the green button. I did not pick up the phone. I put it on speaker and left it on the cooler. I wanted them to be small voices in the vastness of the Montana wilderness. Dad. Dad, are you there? Terrence's voice was distorted, tinny, and frantic. I could hear the wind blowing in the background. I could hear cars driving by. I could hear the panic in his throat. Hello, Terrence, I said. My voice was calm. It was the voice of a man who had already made his peace. Dad, oh my God. Where are you? The house. Dad, the house is gone. There is a fence. There are signs. They said you sold it. Tell me this is a joke. Tell me this is some kind of sick lesson and you are going to fix it. I leaned back in my chair, watching an eagle circle overhead. It is no joke, Terrence. The house is sold. The transaction closed 3 days ago. The money is in my account. But why? Terrence screamed, his voice cracked. Why would you do this? We have nowhere to go. All our stuff is on the curb. It is ruining. Mom Brenda is sick. Courtney is crying. How could you do this to us? Then I heard a scuffling sound. The phone was snatched away. You listen to me, you senile old man. It was Courtney. Her voice was not sad. It was venomous. It was the sound of a snake that had been stepped on. You cannot do this. That is my house. I have rights. I have residency. I am calling the police. I am calling a lawyer. I am going to sue you for everything you have. I will make sure you die in a state penitentiary. I took a bite of the trout. It was perfectly cooked. Courtney, I said, chewing slowly. You might want to save your money for a motel room instead of a lawyer. But since you brought up the law, let us talk about the law. I cleared my throat. Do you remember the lease agreement Terrence signed 3 years ago? The one you laughed at because the rent was only $1. I waited. I could hear her breathing heavy and jagged on the other end. Clause 4B, I continued. The landlord reserves the right to terminate the lease immediately upon the sale of the property. And Clause 7A. Failure to pay utilities for 3 consecutive months constitutes a material breach of contract allowing for immediate eviction without notice. I paused to let that sink in. You have not paid the electric bill since February, Courtney. You have not paid the water bill since Christmas. I have been paying them. Every single month. Which means you have been in breach of contract for half a year. I did not need to give you 30 days notice. I did not need to give you 24 hours. Legally, you were squatters. That is a technicality, she shrieked. We are family. You do not evict family on a technicality. Family. I laughed. It was a dry, short sound that disappeared into the mountain air. That is an interesting word, Courtney. It reminds me of a text message I received last week. Do you remember it, or should I read it to you? I picked up the phone and scrolled to the message, even though I had memorized every word. My son texted me saying, "Plans changed. You are not joining the cruise. My wife wants just family." I put the phone back on the cooler. You wanted just family, Courtney. You wanted privacy. You wanted a vacation where you did not have to look at my old face or hear my old stories. You wanted me gone. There was silence on the other end. Not the peaceful silence of Montana, but the stunned silence of people who have been caught in their own trap. Well, I said, I decided to give you exactly what you asked for. You wanted privacy. Now you have absolute privacy. You do not have to worry about me living in the master bedroom anymore. You do not have to worry about me walking in the garden. You do not have to worry about sharing your space. It is just you. And Terrence and your mother, just your family, exactly the way you wanted it. Dad, please. Terrence was back on the phone now. He was crying, actual sobbing tears. Dad, I am sorry. I did not mean it. She made me send it. Please, Dad, we have no money. The bank took the car. We are stuck on the street. Just send us enough for a hotel, just for tonight. Please, I am your son. I looked at the fire. It was dying down, turning into glowing red embers. I love you, Terrence, I said. And I meant it. I loved him enough to let him fall. Because I love you, I cannot help you. If I send you money now, you will never learn. You will go back to being a child, waiting for Daddy to fix his mistakes. You are 32 years old, son. It is time you learned how to survive. But we will die out here, he wailed. You won't die. You have 2 arms. You have 2 legs. You have a brain. Figure it out. That is what men do. We figure it out. Earl. It was Brenda's voice now, weak and trembling. Earl, surely you would not leave a sick woman on the street. I have a heart condition. You have a condition, Brenda, I agreed. But it is not your heart. It is your soul. You spent 3 years living in my house, eating my food, and treating me like a servant in my own home. You called me a grump. You told Courtney I was a burden. Well, the burden is gone. Good luck with your health. I reached for another log and threw it on the fire. Sparks flew up into the night sky. I am done talking, I said. The house is gone. The money is secured in a trust you cannot touch. The car is property of the bank. The only thing you own is what is in those black plastic bags on the curb. I suggest you start walking before it gets dark. Dad, wait. Terrence screamed. Dad, do not hang up. Dad, please. I looked at the phone one last time. Goodbye, Terrence. Become the man I know you can be. Or do not. The choice is yours. I tapped the red button. The screaming stopped. The silence returned. But I knew it was not enough. As long as this phone existed, as long as this number was active, they would keep calling. They would keep begging. They would keep trying to pull me back into their toxicity. I flipped the phone over and popped the back cover off. I pulled out the battery. Then I slid the small SIM card out of its slot. It was a tiny piece of plastic, a microchip that held the connection to my past life. It held the contacts of people who only called when they wanted something. It held the history of a father who gave too much and received too little. I stood up and walked to the edge of the water. The lake was black now, reflecting the moon. The water was cold and deep. I held the SIM card between my thumb and forefinger. I squeezed it until I felt the plastic snap. Then I threw it. I watched it catch the moonlight for a brief second before it hit the water with a tiny plip. It sank, down into the mud, down into the darkness, down where no signal could ever reach. I took a deep breath. The air filled my lungs. I was completely cut off. No one knew where I was. No one could reach me. I was a ghost. I walked back to my chair and sat down. I picked up my beer and finished it. Then I picked up my fishing rod and cast the line back into the water. The reel sang a quiet song as the line flew out. I did not know what tomorrow would bring. I did not know if Terrence would survive the night. I did not know if Courtney would leave him. But I knew one thing. Whatever happened next was not my problem. I watched the bobber float on the surface of the water. It is just you and me now, Earl, I whispered to the night. And for the first time in a long time, I liked the company. I did not need to be a fly on the wall to know what was happening in that motel room. I have lived long enough to know what happens when you put 4 desperate people in a confined space with no money and no future. It is like putting 4 scorpions in a jar and shaking it. Eventually, they stop trying to climb the glass and start stinging each other. They had checked into the Sunshine Motor Inn, which was a cruel name because there was nothing sunny about it. It was one of those places on the edge of town where the neon sign flickers, and the sheets are so thin you can see the mattress pattern underneath. They could only afford one room with 2 queen beds for 4 adults. The air in the room smelled of stale cigarettes and mildew. The carpet was sticky. The air conditioner rattled like a dying engine, but it barely cooled the humid Florida air. Terrence sat on the edge of the bed with his head in his hands. He was trying to make himself invisible. But in a room that small, there is nowhere to hide. Brenda was pacing back and forth. Her expensive heels were clicking on the linoleum floor by the bathroom. Click, clack, click, clack. It was the sound of a ticking bomb. You promised me, she shouted. Her voice was shrill enough to peel the paint off the walls. You promised me a villa, Terrence. You said we would sell the old man's house and buy a villa with a pool. Terrence did not look up. I am trying, Brenda. Trying is not good enough, she screamed. She threw her handbag onto the bed. Do you know what I did for you? Do you know what I sacrificed? I sold my condo, Terrence. I sold my beautiful 2-bedroom condo because you and your wife convinced me that we were going to be one big happy family in Earl's mansion. I signed the papers last week. I have no home to go back to. I have nothing. This was news to me. I sat on my porch in Montana and smiled. Brenda had burned her own bridge. She had sold her safety net out of pure greed, thinking she could just slide into my life and take over. Now she was just as homeless as they were. Courtney was sitting on the other bed painting her nails. It was a bizarre act of normalcy in the middle of chaos. She blew on her wet nails and looked at her mother. Stop yelling, Mom. It is giving me a headache. You should have a headache, Brenda snapped, turning on her daughter. You picked him. I told you to marry the doctor. But no, you wanted the guy with the rich daddy. Well, look at him now. His daddy cut him off, and he is nothing but a man in a wrinkled suit sitting in a cheap motel. Terrence stood up. I am going to fix this. I found a lawyer. A lawyer? Courtney scoffed. We cannot afford a sandwich, Terrence. How are we going to afford a lawyer? It is a legal aid clinic, Terrence said, pulling a crumpled flyer from his pocket. It is free. I have an appointment in an hour. We are going to show them the emails. We are going to show them the lease. Dad cannot just throw us out. There are laws, squatters' rights, something. We will get the house back. Courtney looked at him. For a second, I think she actually pitied him. Or maybe she just wanted to believe the lie because the truth was too ugly to face. Fine, she said, capping her nail polish. Let us go see this lawyer. But if he laughs at us, Terrence, I swear I am leaving. I am not sure where she thought she would go, but the threat hung in the air. They walked 6 blocks to the legal aid clinic because they did not have money for a cab. The clinic was squeezed between a pawn shop and a liquor store. The waiting room was full of people who looked tired and beaten down. When their name was called, they walked into a small office that smelled of old coffee and paper. The lawyer was a man named Mr. Henderson. He looked like he had not slept in a week. His tie was loose and his desk was buried under mountains of files. He did not offer them coffee. He just pointed to the chairs. Make it quick, he said. I have 20 cases to get through before lunch. Terrence laid everything out on the desk. He laid out the printed emails. He laid out the lease agreement I had made him sign 3 years ago. He laid out the text messages where I told him the house was sold. My father is insane, Terrence explained, trying to sound authoritative. He is suffering from dementia. He sold our home without our permission while we were on vacation. We have established residency. We have mail delivered there. He cannot just lock us out. We want an emergency injunction to stop the demolition and let us back in. Mr. Henderson rubbed his eyes and pulled the lease agreement toward him. He put on a pair of reading glasses and started to read. The room was silent. Brenda was tapping her foot. Courtney was chewing her lip. Terrence was holding his breath, waiting for the lawyer to slam his fist on the desk and declare this a great injustice. Mr. Henderson read the first page, then he flipped to the second page, then he flipped to the back. He stopped. He went back to the second page. He tapped his finger on a paragraph. Then he chuckled. It was a dry, humorless sound. "What is so funny?" Courtney asked sharply. "This lease," Mr. Henderson said, looking up at them. "Who wrote this? Did your father write this?" "Yes," Terrence said. "He used to be a contractor. He thinks he knows everything." Mr. Henderson shook his head. "He does not think he knows everything, son. He actually knows everything. This is not a standard lease. This is a fortress." "What do you mean?" Terrence asked, his voice trembling. Mr. Henderson turned the paper around so they could see. "Look at Clause 4B right here. It says clearly that the lease is contingent upon the property remaining in the possession of the landlord. It explicitly states that in the event of a sale, the lease terminates immediately. Not in 30 days. Immediately. And you signed it right here." "But I did not read it." Terrence stammered. "It was a $1 lease. I just signed it because he said it was for the insurance. Ignorance of the contract is not a defense, Mr. Henderson said. But that is not even the best part. Look at Clause 7A, the Utilities Clause. It says that failure to pay utilities for 90 days constitutes a voluntary abandonment of the property." So what Terrence said. So Mr. Henderson leaned back in his chair. "Who paid the electric bill? Who paid the water bill?" "My dad did," Terrence admitted. "Then legally you abandoned the property months ago," Mr. Henderson said, closing the file. "Your father has been housing you as a guest who overstayed his welcome. He did not evict a tenant. He simply stopped hosting a guest. There is no judge in this state who will grant you an injunction. In fact, if you take this to court, your father could countersue you for 3 years of back rent at market value. Do you have $50,000 lying around to pay him?" The blood drained from Terrence's face. "No," he whispered. Mr. Henderson stood up. "Then my advice to you is to walk away. Your father outsmarted you. He dotted every I and crossed every T. He built a trap and you walked right into it and lived in it for 3 years. He was 10 steps ahead of you the entire time." "But we are homeless," Brenda wailed. Mr. Henderson looked at her with zero sympathy. "Then I suggest you find a shelter, because legally you have no leg to stand on. Next case, please." They walked out of the office into the blinding afternoon sun. The hope that had sustained them for the last hour had evaporated. Terrence stopped on the sidewalk. He looked at Courtney. He looked at his mother-in-law. He was waiting for them to tell him it was okay. He was waiting for them to say they would figure it out together as a family. But that is not what happened. Courtney looked at Terrence, but she did not see her husband. She saw an anchor. She saw a dead weight that was dragging her down to the bottom of the ocean. She pulled out her phone. She had charged it at the motel. "I need a drink," she said. "We do not have money for drinks," Terrence said, reaching for her hand. She pulled her hand away. It was a sharp rejection. "I'm not asking you to buy it, Terrence." She walked a few steps away and dialed a number. Terrence watched her. He could see her put on a different face. Her voice changed. It became soft and flirtatious. "Hey, Kyle," she said into the phone. "Yeah, long time no see. I am actually in town. Things are a bit crazy right now. Yeah, I would love to grab a drink. Maybe you can pick me up." Terrence stood there feeling his heart break into 1,000 pieces. Kyle was her ex-boyfriend, the one she dated before she met Terrence, the one who had money but treated her like an accessory. "Who are you calling?" Terrence asked, his voice weak. Courtney hung up the phone. She looked at him with cold, dead eyes. "I am calling a friend, Terrence. Someone who can actually help me. Because clearly you cannot." She turned to Brenda. "Come on, Mom. We are going to wait at the coffee shop." "But what about Terrence?" Brenda asked, looking at him. "He can go back to the motel," Courtney said. "He needs to figure out his life. I cannot be married to a man who lets his father destroy us and then thanks him for the lesson." She turned on her heel and walked away. The click-clack of her heels on the pavement sounded like gunshots. Terrence stood alone on the corner. The city noise rushed around him, but he felt like he was in a vacuum. He watched his wife and her mother walk away until they disappeared around the corner. He looked down at his wrinkled suit. He looked at his empty hands. He realized then that his father was right. The family he had tried so hard to please, the family he had sacrificed his relationship with his father for, was not a family at all. They were passengers, and now that the ride was over, they were getting off. He sat down on a bus stop bench and put his head in his hands. For the first time in 32 years, Terrence Jackson was truly alone. And in Montana, I cast my line into the water and waited. I knew the breaking point had arrived. Now we would see if my son had enough of me in him to survive the fall. The alarm on Terrence's phone went off at 6 in the morning inside the cramped room of the Sunshine Motor Inn. It was a jarring digital sound that sliced through the heavy, humid air of the room. He woke up not in his king-sized bed with Egyptian cotton sheets, but on a lumpy mattress that smelled of industrial bleach and other people's sweat. For a moment he laid there staring at the water stain on the ceiling, trying to remember why his back hurt. Then the memory of the last 48 hours crashed down on him like a tidal wave. The cruise, the house, the mud, the lawyer who laughed in his face. He looked over at the other bed. Courtney was asleep with an eye mask on, trying to block out the reality of their existence. Brenda was snoring loudly, her mouth open. Terrence felt a surge of resentment so hot it almost choked him, but he pushed it down. He had a plan. He still had his job. He was the regional sales director for a mid-sized logistics firm. It was a good job. It paid 6 figures. It commanded respect. He told himself that as long as he had his title and his salary, he could fix this. He could get an advance on his paycheck. He could rent a luxury apartment. He could get back on his feet and sue me later. He got dressed in the dim light of the bathroom. He had to steam his wrinkled suit using the hot water from the shower because the motel did not have an iron. He looked in the mirror. The dark circles under his eyes told the truth, but if he smiled just right, he looked like the successful man he used to be. He took a bus to work because he had no car. He walked the last 3 blocks sweating in the morning heat, but when he walked through the glass doors of his office building, he stood taller. This was his kingdom. Here he was not a homeless man. Here he was Mr. Jackson. He walked past the receptionist, giving her a confident wave. "Good morning, Sarah," he said. Sarah did not smile back. She looked down at her desk, shuffling papers nervously. That should have been his first warning. Terrence walked to his office. He sat down in his leather chair and exhaled. He felt safe here. He turned on his computer, ready to type up a request for a salary advance, but before he could even log in, his office phone rang. It was not a client. It was the executive assistant to the CEO. "Mr. Jackson, Mr. Sterling would like to see you in the conference room immediately." Terrence felt a knot form in his stomach. Immediately was never a good word. But he straightened his tie. He told himself it was probably about the quarterly numbers. He was a top performer. They needed him. He walked into the conference room. It was a large room with a glass table that seemed to stretch for miles. At the end of the table sat Mr. Sterling, the CEO. Next to him was Linda, the head of human resources. And next to her was a man Terrence did not recognize, but who wore a cheap suit and carried a thick briefcase. "Shut the door, Terrence," Mr. Sterling said. His voice was not friendly. It was the voice of a man who was cleaning up a mess. Terrence sat down. Everyone was staring at him. "Is everything okay?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Mr. Sterling slid a piece of paper across the glass table. It made a harsh, scratching sound. "We received a call this morning, Terrence, from a collection agency. Apparently you listed the company main line as your contact number for several personal loans." Terrence froze. He had done that years ago, thinking it made him look stable to lenders. He never thought they would actually call. And then Mr. Sterling continued. "We also received a visit from this gentleman. He is a process server. He just served the company with a garnish order. Apparently you have defaulted on a significant amount of debt that was previously secured by your father. Since the security was withdrawn, the creditors are coming after your wages." Terrence felt the room spinning. "I can explain. My father and I are having a dispute. It is temporary. I will pay it off." Mr. Sterling held up his hand, stopping him. "That is your personal business, Terrence. Or it was until this morning." He picked up another piece of paper. This one was on thick, cream-colored stationery. I recognized it immediately because I bought that stationery specifically for this letter. "We received a letter via courier an hour ago," Mr. Sterling said. "It is from your father, Mr. Earl Jackson." Terrence's heart hammered against his ribs. What did he say? Mr. Sterling put on his reading glasses. He read the letter aloud. Every word hung in the air like a guillotine blade. "Dear Mr. Sterling, please accept my sincere apologies for any disruption my son's financial chaos may cause your esteemed company. As I have recently had to withdraw my financial backing due to severe ethical concerns regarding his conduct, I felt it was my duty to inform you that I can no longer vouch for his financial stability. I raised him to be a man of integrity, but unfortunately greed can sometimes cloud judgment. I trust you will handle his employment status with the prudence required for a man in a position of financial trust. Sincerely, Earl Jackson. Mr. Sterling put the letter down. He looked at Terrence with a mixture of pity and disgust. Ethical concerns. Terrence, financial instability. You handle accounts worth millions of dollars. You manage logistics for our biggest clients. We cannot have a director of sales who is being chased by debt collectors and whose own father questions his integrity. I am not a thief, Terrence stammered. I am good at my job. Look at my numbers. Your numbers are good, Linda from HR said, speaking for the first time. But your credit check is now a disaster. The clause in your contract regarding financial good standing for executive officers is clear. You are a liability. So you are firing me, Terrence whispered. The last pillar of his life was crumbling. Mr. Sterling looked at Linda. Then he looked back at Terrence. No, we are not firing you. Terrence exhaled. A wave of relief washed over him. Thank you. Thank you so much. I promise I will fix this. We are not firing you. Mr. Sterling continued, his voice cold as ice. Because if we fire you, we have to pay you a severance package. And frankly, you do not deserve it. Instead, we are restructuring your role effective immediately. Restructuring, Terrence asked, confused. You are being removed from the director position. We are transferring you to the warehouse logistics team. You will be an inventory coordinator. Inventory coordinator. That was a polite title for a box counter. It was an entry-level job. It paid a third of his current salary. You cannot be serious, Terrence said, standing up. That is a demotion. I will not take it. Then you can resign, Mr. Sterling said simply. If you resign, you get nothing. No severance, no unemployment benefits. And with your current reputation, good luck finding another job in this industry. Terrence sank back into his chair. He was trapped. He had no money. He had bills piling up. He needed insurance. He needed any cash flow he could get. I will take it, he whispered. Good, Mr. Sterling said. Report to the basement level. Your new supervisor is Mike. And Terrence, hand over your company credit card and your office keys. Today. Terrence walked out of that conference room a broken man. He had walked in as a king and he walked out as a peasant. He had to go to his office and pack his personal things into a cardboard box while Sarah, the receptionist, watched. He had to hand over his corporate card. He had to take the elevator down not to the lobby but to the basement. He spent the rest of the day counting boxes of paper clips and printer toner in a windowless room that smelled of dust. He was wearing a $2,000 suit to count boxes worth $5. At 5 o'clock he clocked out. He did not take a cab home. He walked to the bus stop. He sat on the plastic bench clutching his box of personal items. He thought about me. He thought about the letter. He realized that I had not just cut him off. I had dismantled him. I had stripped away every layer of his false identity until there was nothing left but the scared little boy who never learned the value of $1. He arrived back at the Sunshine Motor Inn an hour later. The sun was setting, casting long orange shadows across the parking lot. He walked up the stairs to room 204. He opened the door. Courtney and Brenda were waiting. They were sitting on the bed, surrounded by fast food wrappers. They looked up when he entered, expecting a miracle. Well, Courtney said. She did not ask how his day was. She did not ask if he was okay. Did you get the advance? Terrence put the box down on the wobbly table. He loosened his tie. He looked at his wife. No, he said. What do you mean, no? Brenda snapped. You are the director. Just tell them you need money. I am not the director anymore, Terrence said, his voice flat. I got demoted. I work in the warehouse now. Courtney stared at him. Her mouth fell open. You work in the warehouse? My dad wrote a letter, Terrence said, sinking onto the bed. He told them I was unethical. They garnered my wages. I make $20 an hour now, Courtney. That is it. The silence in the room was heavy. It was the silence of a predator realizing its prey has no meat left on the bones. You are joking, Courtney whispered. I wish I was, Terrence said, closing his eyes. Then it happened. Courtney grabbed a plastic cup of soda from the nightstand and threw it. It hit Terrence in the chest. Dark, sticky liquid exploded over his white shirt. Ice cubes slid down his lap. You useless loser, she screamed. $20 an hour. How am I supposed to live on $20 an hour? I need creams that cost more than your weekly paycheck. She stood up and started throwing things. She threw the remote control. She threw a pillow. She threw his own shoes at him. "You lied to me," she shrieked. "You said you were a provider. You are nothing. You are a warehouse worker. My friends will laugh at me." Brenda joined in. "I told you he was a failure. I told you. We should have never trusted him." Terrence sat there covered in soda and shame. He did not fight back. He did not yell. He just took it. He realized in that moment that the woman screaming at him did not see a husband in crisis. She saw a broken ATM machine. She was kicking it because it would not dispense cash. "I am going out," Courtney said, grabbing her purse. "Where are you going?" Terrence asked, wiping soda from his face. "Anywhere that is not here," she spat. "And do not wait up." She slammed the door so hard the cheap picture frame on the wall rattled. Brenda followed her, muttering curses under her breath. Terrence was left alone in the room. The smell of stale food and failure filled his nose. He looked at his stained shirt. He looked at the box of office supplies. He lay back on the bed and stared at the water stain on the ceiling. He had no father. He had no house. He had no status. And now he knew he had no wife. He was at the bottom of the well. And the only person holding the rope was the man he had betrayed. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in years he prayed. But he did not pray for money. He prayed for the night to end, because he knew that tomorrow he had to wake up and count boxes while the rest of the world moved on without him. The Sunshine Motor Inn had become a prison cell for my son and his wife. It had been 2 weeks since Terrence lost his title and his salary, 2 weeks of eating instant noodles, 2 weeks of Courtney staring at the peeling wallpaper and plotting. She was not a woman who accepted defeat. She was a woman who recalculated. She knew she could not sue me. She knew she could not charm me. So she decided to weaponize the one thing she knew I wanted more than anything in the world. It was a Tuesday afternoon when she executed her plan. Terrence was at work counting boxes in the basement. Brenda was asleep. Courtney sat on the edge of the bed with her laptop open using the motel's slow Wi-Fi. She wasn't looking for jobs. She wasn't looking for apartments. She was on a website that sold prank items, novelty gifts. She clicked on an item called the Prank Positive Pregnancy Test, guaranteed to show 2 lines every time. She bought it with the last $20 on a prepaid debit card. When the package arrived 2 days later, she didn't tell Terrence. She needed him to be a believer too. She needed his reaction to be genuine so she could use it against me. She waited until he came home from work tired and smelling of cardboard dust. She left the test on the bathroom sink. When Terrence saw it, he froze. He walked out of the bathroom holding the plastic stick like it was a holy relic. "Courtney," he whispered, "is this real?" Courtney put on the performance of her life. She looked down at her hands and squeezed out a tear. "I didn't want to tell you," she said, her voice trembling. "Not now. Not when we have nothing. How can we bring a baby into this, Terrence? We live in a motel." Terrence fell to his knees. He hugged her waist. He cried. For him, this wasn't a trick. It was a lifeline. It was a reason to keep going. "We will fix this," he sobbed. "I promise. My dad, he won't let his grandchild grow up in a motel. He has to help us now." That was exactly what Courtney wanted to hear. "Send him a picture," she whispered. "Tell him he is going to be a grandfather." Back in Montana, I was sitting by the fire when my phone buzzed. It was a new number, but I knew who it was. I had unblocked Terrence the day before just in case of an emergency. A father's instinct is a hard thing to kill. I opened the message. It was a photo. A plastic stick with 2 pink lines. And a text. "Dad, you are going to be a grandpa. Please, don't let your grandson be born in a motel." I stared at that screen for an hour. The fire burned down to ash and I didn't move. A grandson. My heart, which I thought had turned to stone, cracked open. I remembered holding Terrence for the first time. I remembered the smell of baby powder and the softness of his skin. I remembered Martha whispering that she wanted a house full of grandkids. Could I really turn my back on an innocent child? I stood up and paced the small cabin. I argued with myself. They are liars, Earl. They are manipulators. But a baby hasn't done anything wrong. A baby is a fresh start. I didn't sleep that night. I tossed and turned, seeing the face of a child I hadn't met yet. By morning, the decision was made. I packed my bag. I got into my truck. I didn't call them. I wanted to see them. I wanted to look into Terrence's eyes and see if the fatherhood had changed him, If I saw genuine humility, I would help. I wouldn't give them the house back, but I would pay for an apartment. I would pay for the medical bills. I would make sure the child was safe. I drove for 12 hours straight. I drank bad coffee and listened to talk radio to keep my eyes open. I crossed state lines. I drove through rainstorms. The hope in my chest grew with every mile. I was going to be a grandfather. I was going to have a second chance. I arrived at the Sunshine Motor Inn just as the sun was setting. The neon sign was buzzing. I parked my truck across the street. I didn't want to spook them. I walked up the stairs to room 204. I was carrying a small gift I had bought at a gas station stop. A small stuffed bear. It was silly, but I wanted to have something in my hands. I reached the door. I raised my hand to knock, but then I heard laughter. It wasn't happy laughter. It was raucous, drunken laughter. I froze. The window next to the door was open just a crack to let in the breeze. I leaned closer. Pour me another one. Mom. Courtney's voice drifted out. I heard the clink of glass. I peeked through the gap in the curtains. What I saw made me drop the stuffed bear. Courtney was sitting on the bed. She was holding a plastic cup filled with dark liquid. A bottle of whiskey sat on the nightstand. She was smoking a cigarette, blowing smoke rings toward the ceiling. Brenda was sitting next to her, laughing so hard she was shaking. Did you see the text he sent back? Brenda cackled. He said he was speechless. He is hooked, Courtney said, taking a long drag from the cigarette. The old fool is hooked. I told you, Mom. Earl has a weakness. He thinks family means something. She took a sip of the whiskey. A pregnant woman drinking whiskey. But what if he asks for a doctor's note? Brenda asked. Courtney laughed. I already printed a fake ultrasound from the internet. I changed the date on Photoshop. It cost me $5 at the print shop. $5 to get $1 million payout. She stood up and did a little spin. We are getting a house, Mom, or at least a fat check. As soon as he wires the money, I am going to have a tragic miscarriage. I will cry. I will blame the stress he caused me. He will feel so guilty he will probably buy me a car just to apologize. She raised her cup in a toast. To the phantom baby. May he rest in peace after the check clears. They clinked cups. I stood outside that door and I felt something inside me die. It wasn't my heart, it was my hope. The Earl Jackson who drove 12 hours to save his family died on that walkway. The Earl Jackson who wanted to be a grandfather evaporated into the humid night air. I looked down at the stuffed bear lying in the dirt. I didn't pick it up. It belonged there, in the dirt. I didn't knock. I didn't kick down the door. I didn't scream. I took out my phone. I turned on the voice recorder app. I held it up to the window. I recorded them for 5 minutes. I recorded the laughter. I recorded the plan. I recorded Courtney mocking my gullibility. I recorded Brenda calling Terrence an idiot for believing it too. When I had enough, I stopped the recording. I saved the file. I named it The Truth. Then I turned around and walked back to my truck. I didn't drive home. I drove to the nearest electronics store. I bought a high-definition projector and a portable screen. If they wanted a show, I would give them a show. I drove to a hotel, a nice one, and checked in. I ordered room service. I slept for 8 hours. When I woke up the next morning, I wasn't sad. I wasn't conflicted. I was ready. I sent a text to Terrence. I am in town. Let's have dinner tonight. Bring everyone. I have a surprise for you, he replied instantly. Thank God, Dad, we will be there. He thought the surprise was a check. He thought the surprise was a key to a new house. He had no idea that the surprise was an execution. I looked at myself in the hotel mirror. I adjusted my tie. You wanted to play a game, Courtney, I said to my reflection. Game on. The restaurant Terrence chose for our reconciliation dinner was called The Golden Table. It was one of those chain restaurants that tries to look expensive with fake mahogany paneling and dim lighting, but you can still smell the frozen fryer oil the moment you walk in. I arrived 5 minutes late on purpose. I wanted them to sweat. I wanted them to check their watches and wonder if the old man had backed out. I walked through the double doors carrying a small black briefcase. Inside was not a checkbook, and it was not a deed to a new house. It was a portable projector and a Bluetooth speaker. I scanned the room. They were seated at a long table in the back corner, but it was not just Terrence and Courtney and Brenda. Oh no, they had called in the cavalry. Seated around the table were my sister-in-law Bernice, who never called me unless she needed bail money for her son. Next to her was Uncle Marcus, who had borrowed $5,000 from me in '98 and never paid it back. And there were 2 cousins I barely recognized. They had assembled a jury of leeches. When they saw me, they all stood up. It was like a choreographed dance, big smiles, arms open. Earl, you made it, Bernice boomed, coming over to hug me. She smelled of mothballs and cheap gin. We were just saying how much we missed you. I let her hug me. I felt the coldness of her heart through her polyester dress. I walked to the head of the table where they had left an empty chair. It was the seat of honor, or the seat of the victim, depending on how you looked at it. Terrence looked terrible. Even in the dim light, I could see the bags under his eyes. He was wearing a suit that I recognized as one he used to wear to weddings, but now it hung loose on his frame. He had lost weight. Courtney, on the other hand, was glowing, or she was pretending to glow. She was wearing a modest white dress, very different from her usual designer outfits. She had her hand resting protectively on her stomach. "Dad," Terrence said, his voice cracking. "Thank you for coming. Really, it means everything to us." I sat down. I placed the briefcase on the floor by my feet. I ordered a water. Just water. So I said, looking around the table, "You called the whole family. We just wanted to share the good news," Brenda chirped. She was sitting next to Courtney, acting like the proud grandmother-to-be. "It is not every day a miracle happens, Earl. A baby. A Jackson heir." Bernice leaned in. "You know, Earl, you have been hard on them. We all make mistakes. But throwing your own son out on the street, that is not the Christian way. That is not how Mama raised us." Uncle Marcus nodded, his mouth full of bread rolls. "Family helps family, Earl. You got all that money from the house sale. You are sitting on a gold mine while your grandbaby is sleeping in a motel. That is cold-blooded, man. Cold-blooded." I let them talk. I let them pile on the guilt. I watched Courtney dab at her dry eyes with a napkin. "I know I have been difficult," Courtney whispered softly. She looked down at the table, playing the part of the repentant sinner perfectly. "I was selfish, Dad. I admit it. But this baby changed me. When I saw that positive test, I realized that nothing matters except family. I want my son to know his grandfather. I want him to run in the garden like Terrence did." She looked up at me with big, watery eyes. "Please, Dad, help us. Not for me, for him." She rubbed her belly. The table went silent. They were all looking at me, waiting for the checkbook to come out, waiting for the grumpy old man to melt. I took a sip of my water. It was cool and refreshing. "I'm glad you said that, Courtney," I said, my voice steady. "I'm glad you brought everyone here to witness this. Because you are right. Family is about truth. And I think we should start this new chapter with absolute truth." Terrence smiled. He thought I was agreeing. He reached for Courtney's hand. "I have a little gift for the baby," I said. I reached down and picked up my briefcase. I set it on the table. "Is it money?" Uncle Marcus asked greedily. "Better," I said. "It is a memory." I opened the case and pulled out the projector. I aimed it at the blank cream-colored wall opposite our table. I pulled out the speaker. "What is this?" Courtney asked, a flicker of unease crossing her face. I connected my phone. "I was so moved by your news, I said that I drove all the way back from Montana to surprise you at the motel yesterday. But when I got to your door, I heard you celebrating, and I wanted to capture that moment of joy." Courtney went pale. Her hand froze on her stomach. "Earl, wait," Brenda stammered. I hit play. The video I had recorded through the window was clear enough, but the audio was crystal clear. Courtney's voice boomed through the restaurant, amplified by the speaker. "The old fool is hooked. I told you, Mom. Earl has a weakness." The restaurant went quiet. Other diners turned to look. Then came the sound of Courtney laughing. I printed a fake ultrasound from the internet. I changed the date on Photoshop. It cost me $5. On the screen, the grainy video showed Courtney holding a cigarette in one hand and a cup of whiskey in the other. "To the phantom baby. May he rest in peace after the check clears." I let the video play until the end. I let every person at that table hear Brenda call Terrence an idiot. I let them hear Courtney call me a senile old dog. When the video ended, I turned off the projector. The silence at the table was heavy. It was suffocating. Bernice was staring at Courtney with her mouth open. Uncle Marcus had stopped chewing. Terrence was looking at his wife like she was an alien. "You are not pregnant," he whispered. Courtney was shaking. Her face was a mask of terror. "Dad, I can explain. We were just blowing off steam. It was a joke. I am pregnant. I really am." I stood up. I reached into my jacket pocket. I pulled out a folded piece of paper. "Courtney," I said, "you are a very good actress, but you are a terrible biologist." I unfolded the paper. "Terrence, do you remember when you were 12 years old And you had the mumps. You were very sick. I spent weeks in the hospital with you. Terrence nodded dumbly. The doctors told us there was a complication, I said. A severe case of orchitis. I didn't tell you the details because you were a child and I didn't want you to worry. But Dr. Stevens was very clear. I slid the paper across the table to Terrence. It was a copy of his medical records from 20 years ago, stamped by the urologist. You are sterile, Terrence. You have been sterile since 1998. The chances of you conceiving a child naturally are 0. Terrence looked at the paper. He read the medical jargon. Azoospermia, irreversible. He looked up at Courtney. Courtney stood up, knocking her chair over. You knew, she screamed at me. You knew the whole time. I looked at her cold and hard. I knew you were a liar, Courtney. I just needed to prove it to him. Terrence stood up. His face was red. His fists were clenched. You faked it, he yelled at her. His voice echoed off the walls. You made me beg my father for a baby that does not exist. You drank whiskey while you told me you were carrying my son. Courtney looked around the room. Her allies, the relatives I had despised, were now looking at her with disgust. Even leeches have a code, and faking a pregnancy to scam a grandfather broke it. Let's go, Mom, Courtney said, grabbing her purse. She tried to walk out with her head high, but she looked small. She looked defeated. Brenda scrambled after her, not daring to look me in the eye. I watched them leave. I watched them walk out of the restaurant and out of our lives. Terrence was left standing there holding the medical report. He looked at me. There were tears in his eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of clarity. He finally saw her. He finally saw himself. I am sorry, Dad, he whispered. I know, I said. I buttoned my jacket. I picked up my projector and put it back in the case. I am leaving now, Terrence. I am going back to Montana. Do not follow me. You have a lot of work to do on yourself. I started to walk away. Earl, wait. Uncle Marcus called out. Who is paying for the dinner? We ordered steaks. I stopped. I looked at the table full of food. I looked at the wine bottles they had ordered before I arrived. I looked at Terrence. He is, I said, pointing to my son. He is the one who invited you. But he is broke, Bernice cried. Then I guess you all better chip in, I said. Welcome to the family reunion. I walked out of the golden table. The air outside was hot and humid, but to me it felt cool. I walked to my truck. I didn't look back. I knew that inside that restaurant chaos was erupting. I knew the waiter was dropping the check. I knew Terrence was realizing he had to wash dishes to pay for it, but that wasn't my burden to carry. I got in my truck and started the engine. The radio played a country song about leaving the past behind. I turned it up. I had one more stop to make before I left Florida forever, and this one was for me. I drove my truck onto the interstate heading north. The city lights of Florida were fading in my rearview mirror, turning into a blur of orange and red. I did not turn on the radio this time. I sat in the silence, listening to the hum of the tires on the asphalt. I was a man who had just dropped a bomb and walked away before the shockwave hit. I did not need to be there to see what happened next. I knew my son. I knew his temper, which he always tried to hide under expensive suits. And I knew Courtney. I knew that when she was cornered, she did not fight fair. She fought like a rat in a bucket. While I was putting miles between myself and that toxic life, the restaurant I had just left was turning into a war zone. I found out the details later from the police report and from the few witnesses who were willing to talk. It was a spectacle that the staff at the Golden Table would talk about for years. After I walked out, Terrence stood there for a long moment, holding the medical paper that proved his sterility. He looked at it. Then he looked at Courtney. His brain was trying to process the magnitude of the lie, the fake pregnancy, the fake ultrasound, the whiskey, the ridicule. It all crashed down on him at once. He realized that the woman standing in front of him did not love him. She did not even like him. She viewed him as a tool, a broken tool that she had tried to use to pry open my bank account. Courtney tried to push past him. "Move, Terrence," she snapped. "This is embarrassing." That was the spark. Terrence grabbed her arm. It was not a gentle grab. It was the grip of a man who had lost everything. "You are not going anywhere," he yelled. His voice cracked. "You made me look like a fool. You made me beg my father for a child that does not exist." Courtney laughed in his face. It was that same cruel laugh I had heard on the recording. "You are a fool, Terrence," she spat. Look at you. You are a broke loser working in a warehouse. You think I wanted a baby with you. I wanted a house. I wanted a life. Since you couldn't give it to me, I had to improvise." Then she said the thing that broke him. "You should thank me, Terrence. At least I pretended you were a real man. Clearly your father knows you aren't one." Terrence snapped. The years of suppression, the years of being the doormat, the years of buying her love all boiled over. He raised his hand, and for the first time in his life, he struck her. The sound of the slap echoed through the restaurant, silencing the clatter of silverware. Courtney stumbled back, holding her cheek. Her eyes went wide. She wasn't hurt so much as she was shocked that her pet dog had finally bitten her. But she didn't stay down. She screamed, "He hit me. He hit a pregnant woman." She lied even then. Even when everyone knew the truth, she fell back on the lie. That was the signal for the cavalry. Uncle Marcus and the cousins who had been watching with their mouths open saw an opportunity. They didn't care about Courtney, but they saw a chance to be heroes. Or maybe they just wanted to hit someone. They jumped Terrence. Uncle Marcus, who was 50 pounds overweight, tackled him into the buffet table. Trays of lasagna and salad went flying. The cousins joined in, throwing punches. It was a brawl. A low-class, violent brawl in the middle of a family restaurant. Terrence fought back. He fought with the desperation of a trapped animal. He threw a punch that caught Uncle Marcus in the nose. Blood sprayed onto the white tablecloths. Bernice was screaming. Brenda was hiding under the table, clutching her purse, not wanting her fake designer bag to get ruined. The manager called the police. Within 5 minutes, the flashing blue lights illuminated the windows. Officers rushed in, tasers drawn. They dragged them out. All of them. Terrence was bleeding from a cut above his eye. Uncle Marcus was holding his nose. Courtney was screaming that she was the victim. They were handcuffed and shoved into the back of squad cars. The family reunion I had refused to pay for ended in the county lockup. They were taken to the central precinct. The holding area smelled of ammonia and despair. They were separated. Terrence sat in an interrogation room, his suit torn, his face swelling. He looked at the two-way mirror and saw nothing but his own reflection. The detective walked in. He was a tired-looking man who had seen too many domestic disputes. "So, Mr. Jackson," the detective said, sitting down. "Your wife says you assaulted her. She says you are unstable." Terrence laughed. It was a hollow, broken sound. "My wife is a liar," he said. "She faked a pregnancy to scam my father." "We know," the detective said. "We spoke to the witnesses. But assaulting a woman is still a crime, son." Meanwhile, in the next room, Courtney was doing what she did best. She was negotiating. She sat there with an ice pack on her cheek, her mascara running down her face. She realized that she was in trouble. The assault charge might stick on Terrence, but she was facing charges of disorderly conduct and destruction of property. And she knew that once the lawyers got involved, her history of fraud might come up. She needed a scapegoat. She needed to throw someone under the bus so hard that no one would notice her slipping away. It wasn't just the slap, she told the officer, her voice trembling with fake fear. "I have been scared of him for months. He is erratic, and I think he is stealing." The officer looked up. "Stealing. Yes. From his company. He brings home boxes of office supplies, electronics, and he uses the company credit card for personal things. He bought me jewelry with it. He told me it was a bonus, but I saw the statements. I told him to stop, but he threatened me." She was weaving a new web. She was taking the crimes they had committed together, the lifestyle they had enjoyed together, and pinning it all on Terrence. She was painting herself as the terrified wife of an embezzler. The officer took notes. This was serious. This moved the case from a domestic dispute to corporate fraud. While Courtney was selling out, her husband Brenda was in the lobby. She had not been arrested because she had claimed she was just a bystander. She was sitting on a plastic bench clutching her purse. She pulled out her phone. She called her sister in Alabama. "Glenda," she whispered. "It is Brenda. Look, things have gone south here. Earl found out. Terrence is in jail. Courtney is done." She listened for a moment. "No, I cannot stay. There is no money, Glenda." The old man cut them off. "The house is gone. I need a place to stay. Can I come sleep on your couch for a few weeks, just until I get my pension check?" She hung up. She stood up and walked to the vending machine. She bought a bottle of water. Then she walked toward the exit. She walked past the room where her daughter was being questioned. She walked past the cell where her son-in-law was bleeding. She pushed open the heavy glass doors and walked out into the night. She didn't leave a note. She didn't call a lawyer for Courtney. She walked to the Greyhound bus station 3 blocks away and bought a one-way ticket to Birmingham. The rats were not just leaving the ship. They were eating each other on the way out. Back in the interrogation room, the detective came back to Terrence. "Mr. Jackson, things just got more complicated. Your wife has given a statement regarding financial improprieties at your workplace. She claims you used corporate funds for personal luxury items." Terrence stared at the detective. The betrayal hit him harder than any punch. She was the one who demanded the jewelry. She was the one who demanded the dinners. And now she was turning him in to save her own skin. "She is lying," he whispered. Maybe the detective said, "But we have to investigate. We are going to hold you overnight. Bail is set at $5,000. Do you have anyone you can call?" Terrence looked at the phone on the table. He knew who he should call. He knew there was only one man in the world who had the money and the power to fix this. He picked up the receiver. His fingers dialed the number automatically. It was the number he had known by heart since he was 6 years old. It rang, and rang, and rang. Then it went to voicemail. "You have reached Earl Jackson. I am currently unavailable. If this is an emergency, call 911. If this is a solicitor, do not call back." Terrence hung up. He realized then that I wasn't unavailable. I was gone. I had thrown my SIM card in the lake. I had driven away. I tried to tell him that night at the motel. I told him I wouldn't help. I told him he had to figure it out. He didn't believe me then. He thought I was bluffing. Now sitting in a cold metal chair with one hand cuffed to the table, he believed me. "I have no one," Terrence said to the detective. The detective nodded. "Then you are going to processing." They took his belt, they took his shoelaces, they took his watch, the expensive Rolex I had given him for graduation, which was now scratched and broken. They walked him down a long concrete hallway. The air smelled of urine and old food. Other prisoners yelled at him as he passed. "Hey, suit man, got a cigarette? Hey, pretty boy, you look lost." They put him in a holding cell. It was a 10 by 10 concrete box with a metal toilet in the corner and a bench bolted to the wall. The heavy steel door slammed shut. Clang! That sound. That final reverberating clang. It was the sound of his old life ending. Terrence sat on the bench. He pulled his knees to his chest. He touched the cut on his forehead. It stung. He thought about the cruise ship. He thought about the house with the rose garden. He thought about the steak dinner he couldn't pay for. He thought about Courtney, the woman he had destroyed his relationship with me for, the woman he had stolen for, the woman he had lied for. She was probably in the next room signing a statement that would send him to prison for embezzlement. He started to cry. But this time it wasn't the frantic crying of a child who wants a toy. It was the deep, silent sobbing of a man who realizes he is completely alone in the universe. He had burned the bridge. He had burned the boat. And now he was drowning. I was hundreds of miles away, sleeping in a roadside motel. I didn't feel his pain. I had shielded myself from it. I had done what I had to do. But as Terrence sat in that cell, staring at the graffiti scratched into the paint, he finally understood the lesson I had been trying to teach him for years. Freedom isn't free, and loyalty is the most expensive currency on earth. He had spent his loyalty on a woman who was bankrupt, and now the bill had come due. The night dragged on. The lights buzzed. Terrence Jackson, the successful sales director, the husband of the influencer, the son of the wealthy contractor, was gone. In his place sat inmate number 49,201, and for the first time in his life, he had to decide who he really was. They say that prison changes a man, but I believe that true change happens when you are standing on the outside with no key to get back in. My son Terrence spent 3 days in the county lockup before the charges were dropped to a misdemeanor and he was released on time served. He walked out of that jail with a plastic bag containing his wallet, his keys, and a broken watch. He had no wife waiting for him in the parking lot. He had no father waiting to drive him home. He had no home. For the first time in his 32 years, Terrence Jackson was a ghost in his own life. The divorce papers were served to him at a homeless shelter 3 weeks later. Courtney did not even show up to court. She sent a lawyer to ensure she got half of his 401k, which was the only asset he had left. Terrence signed the papers without reading them. He did not care about the money anymore. He just wanted to cut the cancer out of his life. The next 6 months were not a journey, they were a descent into hell. But it was a necessary hell. It was the fire that burns away the dead wood so the forest can grow again. Terrence could not get a job in sales. His reputation was destroyed. The letter I wrote to his CEO had circulated. The arrest record was public. The industry blacklisted him. So the man who used to wear Italian suits and drink $300 wine had to put on a pair of steel-toed boots and a neon vest. He got a job as a day laborer on a construction site. It was brutal work. He spent 10 hours a day hauling bags of cement, mixing concrete, and digging trenches in the Florida heat. His hands, which used to be soft and manicured, became blistered and raw. His back, which used to rest on ergonomic office chairs, screamed in agony every night. He lived in a rented room above a garage that smelled of gasoline and wet dog. He ate beans from a can. He washed his own clothes in the sink because he could not afford the laundromat. I was not there to see it, but I heard about it later. I heard that for the first month he cried himself to sleep every night. He hated me. He cursed my name. He blamed me for ruining his life. He told himself that I was a cruel tyrant who enjoyed watching him suffer. But somewhere around the third month, something changed. It happened on a Tuesday. It was payday. Terrence was standing in line at the check-cashing place holding his envelope. It contained $400. $400 for 60 hours of back-breaking labor. A young man in front of him was arguing with the teller. He was shouting that he deserved more money, that the world was unfair, that his boss was a jerk. Terrence looked at the young man. He saw the entitlement. He saw the anger. And like looking into a mirror, he saw himself. He realized then that the $400 in his hand was the first money he had ever truly earned. It was not a gift. It was not a commission from a deal he got because of his last name. It was blood money. It was sweat money. And it felt heavier than any check I had ever written him. He walked out of that store and he did not buy alcohol. He did not buy a lottery ticket. He went to a hardware store and bought a pair of high-quality work gloves. He realized that if he was going to dig ditches, he was going to be the best ditch digger on the crew. He started showing up early. He stopped complaining. When the foreman yelled at him, he did not argue. He just said, "Yes, sir," and got back to work. The other men on the crew who used to mock him for his soft hands started to respect him. They saw the change. They saw the boy dying and the man being born. 6 months passed. The blisters on his hands turned into calluses. The fat on his waist turned into muscle. The arrogance in his eyes turned into humility. He saved every penny. He did not save for a new car. He did not save for a suit. He saved for a bus ticket. He had hired a private investigator for $50 to find an address. It was not hard to find me if you knew where to look. I was registered as the owner of a small cabin near Flathead Lake in Montana. Terrence bought a ticket on the Greyhound bus. It was a 3-day journey. 3 days of sitting on a cramped seat next to strangers smelling diesel fumes and watching America roll by through a dirty window. He traveled across the humidity of the South, through the flat cornfields of the Midwest and up into the mountains. He had a lot of time to think on that bus. He thought about the rose bushes I loved. He thought about the fishing trips we never took. He thought about the text message, "My wife wants just family." He replayed that moment over and over again. He realized that I did not sell the house because I was angry. I sold the house because I was heartbroken. He realized that he had chosen a stranger over the man who taught him to walk. The bus arrived in the small town of Polson, Montana, late in the afternoon. The air was crisp and cold, a sharp contrast to the Florida swamp he had left behind. Terrence stepped off the bus carrying a small canvas bag. He wore a flannel shirt and jeans. He looked like a local. He looked like a worker. He walked. He walked 5 miles out of town, following the map on his cracked phone screen. The road wound up into the hills lined with pine trees that smelled like Christmas. His boots crunched on the gravel. My cabin was at the end of a long dirt driveway. It was a simple structure made of logs with a stone chimney and a wide porch facing the lake. Smoke was rising from the chimney. Terrence stopped at the gate. It was a simple wooden gate with a latch. There was no security guard. There was no fence. He stood there for a long time. The sun began to set, casting long shadows across the yard. Inside the cabin, I was sitting by the window reading a book. I saw him. I saw a figure standing at the gate. At first I thought it was a delivery man or a lost hiker, but then I saw the way he stood. I saw the slope of his shoulders. I saw the way he held his hat in his hands. It was my son. But it was not the son I had left in Florida. That son was gone. This was a stranger with a familiar face. I put down my book. My heart started to hammer in my chest. Part of me wanted to run out there and throw the gate open. Part of me wanted to yell at him to go away, but I did neither. I sat and watched. Terrence did not open the gate. He did not walk up the driveway. He did not scream or beg. He reached into his pocket. He pulled out a small object. It was the watch, the Rolex I had given him for graduation. The crystal was cracked. The band was scratched. But he had kept it. He had not sold it for food. He had not traded it for rent. He had carried it through the hell of the last 6 months as a reminder of who he used to be and who he wanted to be again. He carefully placed the watch on the top of the wooden fence post. He took a handkerchief from his pocket and wiped the dust off the face. Then he reached into his bag and pulled out a piece of paper. He folded it and placed it under the watch so it would not blow away. He stood there for 1 more minute looking at the cabin. He looked at the smoke rising from the chimney. He looked at the lake. He nodded his head once as if accepting a judgment. Then he turned around. He picked up his bag and started walking back down the road. He did not look back. He walked with a steady rhythm, the walk of a man who has nowhere to go but forward. I waited until he disappeared around the bend in the road. Then I stood up. My knees were shaking. I walked out onto the porch. The air was cold. I walked down the driveway to the gate. I picked up the watch. It was still ticking, broken but working. I unfolded the note. It was written on a piece of paper torn from a construction logbook. The handwriting was rougher than I remembered. It said 4 words. "You were right, Dad. That was it. No request for money, no excuse, no sob story, just admission." I looked at the road where he had vanished. I looked at the watch in my hand. I felt a tear run down my cheek. It was the first time I had cried in years, but it was not a tear of sadness. It was a tear of relief. My son was alive. The boy was dead, but the man was alive. I put the watch in my pocket. I looked at the darkening sky. He had walked 5 miles to get here. He would have to walk 5 miles back to town. The next bus did not leave until the morning. He would probably sleep on a bench at the station. I closed the gate. I walked back to the cabin. I did not go after him. Not yet. He needed to finish the walk. He needed to spend the night on the bench. He needed to know that redemption is not a single act, but a journey. But as I sat by the fire that night holding the broken watch, I knew that the story was not over. I knew that the foundation had been poured, the concrete was setting. And soon, very soon, it would be time to start building again. I watched my son disappear into the darkness of the pine trees. The taillights of his life had faded out a long time ago, and now he was walking into the void with nothing but a canvas bag and a broken watch. I stood on my porch for 5 minutes. I listened to the wind howling through the valley. It was the kind of wind that cuts through your jacket and chills your bones. I looked at the watch in my hand. It was cold. It was heavy. It was a symbol of the time we had wasted. I could have gone back inside. I could have thrown another log on the fire and poured myself a whiskey. I could have told myself that he made his bed and now he had to sleep in it. That is what the old Earl would have done, the Earl who was hurt, the Earl who was angry. But looking at that watch, I realized something. Punishment without a path to redemption is just cruelty. I had broken him down. I had stripped him of his ego, his money, and his false friends. If I left him out there on that road tonight, I wasn't teaching him a lesson. I was just throwing him away. And you don't throw away family. You fix them. I put the watch in my pocket. I grabbed my keys. I walked to my truck. The engine roared to life, shattering the silence of the mountain night. I threw it into gear and drove down the driveway. Dust kicked up behind me in a cloud. I drove slow. I scanned the side of the road with my high beams. About 2 miles down the road, I saw him. He was walking on the shoulder, his head down against the wind. He looked small against the backdrop of the massive mountains. He looked like a speck of dust in the uncaring universe. I pulled the truck up alongside him and rolled down the passenger window. He stopped. He didn't look hopeful. He looked resigned. He probably thought I came to yell at him some more, or maybe to tell him he trespassed. "Get in," I said. My voice was flat. It wasn't warm. It wasn't inviting. It was an order. Terrence looked at me. His eyes were red-rimmed and tired. "I can make it to town, Dad," he said. "I don't want to bother you." "I didn't ask you what you wanted," I said. "I said get in." He hesitated for a second. Then he opened the door and climbed in. The cab of the truck smelled of old leather and coffee. It was a smell he probably remembered from his childhood before he traded it for the smell of expensive cologne and desperation. We sat there for a moment. The engine idled. "Where are we going?" he asked quietly. I put the truck in gear and turned it around. "I have a fence line on the north ridge," I said, keeping my eyes on the road. It has been broken for 2 years. The elk keep getting in and eating the garden. It is about 3 miles of barbed wire that needs to be restrung. The posts are rotted. The ground is hard as rock. Terrence looked at me confused. I need a hand, I continued. The pay is minimum wage. You pay for your own food. You pay for your own toiletries. You sleep in the bunkhouse, out back, not in the main cabin. There is no internet. There is no TV. There is just work, hard work, from sunup to sundown. I glanced over at him. If you miss a day, you are fired. If you complain, once you are fired. If I catch you looking for a shortcut, you are fired. I stopped the truck at the gate of my property. I turned to look him full in the face. Do you want the job? Terrence didn't blink. He didn't ask about benefits. He didn't ask about vacation time. Yes, sir, he said. Good, I said. We start at 5 a.m. Don't be late. That was 6 months ago. Terrence didn't just survive the work, he embraced it. The first week his hands bled so much he had to tape them up with duct tape. He walked with a limp because his muscles weren't used to hauling timber, but he never complained, not once. We didn't talk much those first few months. We communicated in grunts and nods. Pass the hammer, hold this post, pull the wire tight. But slowly the silence between us changed. It went from a silence of tension to a silence of understanding. We were rebuilding more than just a fence. We were rebuilding respect. While Terrence was finding himself on the side of a mountain, Courtney was losing herself in the neon lights of the city. I kept tabs on her, not because I cared, but because I wanted to be sure she could never hurt my son again. Karma is a patient hunter, but she always gets her prey. After the disaster at the restaurant and the divorce, Courtney stayed in Florida. She tried to maintain her lifestyle. She maxed out credit cards she opened in her mother's name. She looked for a new target. She thought she found one. A man named Stefan. He claimed to be a cryptocurrency investor from Europe. He had a rented Lamborghini and a fake accent. Courtney thought she had hit the jackpot. She thought she was back in the game. She gave him everything she had left. She pawned her jewelry. She even stole money from her mother's pension checks to invest in his new coin. She thought she was going to be a billionaire. She wasn't. Stefan disappeared 2 months later. He vanished into thin air, taking every cent Courtney had scrounged up. But it got worse. Stefan had used Courtney's name on several fraudulent business loans. When the feds came knocking, they didn't find Stefan. They found Courtney. The last I heard, she was facing 3 years for fraud and identity theft. She was pleading guilty in exchange for a lighter sentence. Her mother, Brenda, had moved back to a trailer park in Alabama and refused to answer her calls. Courtney wanted a life of luxury without working for it. Now she was going to have a life in a cell where she would have to work for pennies an hour. It was a tragic ending, but it was the ending she wrote for herself. Back on the ranch, the seasons changed. The snow melted and the wildflowers began to bloom. It was a Tuesday evening. The sun was setting, painting the sky in streaks of orange and purple. We were down by the lower creek fixing the last section of the fence. Terrence was hammering a staple into a cedar post. Bam! 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 The sound echoed through the valley. He stopped and wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of his glove. He looked different now. He had a beard. His face was tanned. He looked stronger. He looked like a man who could stand on his own 2 feet. He looked at the fence stretching out for miles behind us. Straight, strong, built to last. Built to... "It looks good, Dad," he said. "It does. I agreed. It will hold." Terrence put down his hammer. He leaned against the post. "Dad," he said, looking at the ground, "I never said thank you. For what I asked. For the job." "No," he said, "for the demolition." He looked up at me. His eyes were clear. "You saved my life," he said. "If you hadn't sold that house, if you hadn't cut me off, I would still be sitting on that couch waiting to die. I would still be married to a woman who hated me. I would be nothing. You destroyed my life to save my life." I looked at my son. I saw the man I always knew he could be. "I didn't destroy your life, Terrence," I said softly. "I just cleared the lot. You are the one building the house now. And this time you are building it on rock, not on sand." He smiled. It was a real smile. "Come on," I said, picking up the toolbox. I made a stew. "Let's go eat." We walked back up the hill together. 2 men, father and son. I looked back at the valley one last time. I thought about the house in Florida, the marble floors, the crystal chandeliers, the rose garden. It was a beautiful house. But it was empty. It was a museum of things. This cabin with its drafty windows and creaky floors was full. It was full of hard work. It was full of truth. And now it was full of family. I had to burn down a mansion to find a home. I had to lose a fortune to save a legacy. And as I watched my son walk ahead of me, opening the gate with his calloused hands, I knew the answer to the question that had haunted me for months. Was it worth it? Was the pain, the anger, the destruction worth it? I took a deep breath of the mountain air. Yes, it was worth every penny. Because family isn't about blood. Blood just makes you related. Loyalty makes you family. Respect makes you family. And sometimes you have to lose everything to find out who is really standing next to you when the dust settles. I am Earl Jackson. I am a father. I am a builder. And finally, I am at peace. Thank you for listening to my story. If you have ever had to make a hard choice to save someone you love, tell me about it in the comments below. And if you believe that it is never too late to start over, hit that like button and subscribe. Until next time, remember, the strongest foundations are built on truth. I learned that true love isn't about shielding people from consequences. It is about letting them face the storm so they can learn to weather it. For years, I thought I was helping my son by giving him everything, but I was only stealing his strength. It took losing a house to build a home, and it took a hard goodbye to create a real hello. If you are holding on to someone who hurts you, remember this: you cannot save a drowning man if he keeps pulling you under. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let go. If you believe in the power of tough love and second chances, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this.